to be in.
So just a suggestion, Sheikh, because we have also like atheist agnostics, we can also like discuss what does agnosticism mean? What does atheism really mean? So before we build things, we have to know what each side believe about themselves, that we agree on terminology. Let's say.
Yeah, no problem. But I think this is very clear. I think atheism is the notion that a divine being, in the sense there's a personal God. This is theism. Theism is believing in a personal God, meaning a being which acts spontaneously by free will, and obviously a supernatural being who is supposed to be the creator of the universe. But this supernatural being is because there's a notion also called deism, where people believe that's some kind of an entity which creates. Is a bit confusing, because sometimes deists say also it's also creating by free will and so on, but this one does not send messengers and so on. And that's a self-contradictory notion. So I would say deism is not really a clear option from theism.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Massari. So inshallah, I'll be moderating the event.
Yeah, okay.
If that's okay with you. Inshallah, I'll give some at 3 o'clock or in 2 minutes. Inshallah, I'll be giving some opening remarks about just introducing the event.
Yeah.
And inshallah, if there are any atheists who want to ask questions, because of course the intention here is to present a clash of worldviews, and we want to show the untenability or of whichever position is weaker, inshallah. And so I will give them a chance to sort of introduce where they're coming from, and then Dr. Massari, if you have any objections, which I'm sure you will, maybe you can raise those, inshallah. Like for example, the agnostic position, and why this is sort of a
they can display a position. This is the claim that this question cannot be decided, or if we talk in an objective sense. If we talk in a subjective sense, that the relevant person cannot decide. Some agnostics that I did not come to a decision, but something that try to make it a philosophical point of view that the question cannot be decided. It's impossible to decide. So it will become then a philosophical agnosticism, and both has to be obviously to be addressed. The subjective one is an issue by itself. That is more of psychiatry and psychology, but the objective one is a philosophical issue which needs to be addressed, though, obviously.
Excellent. Great, inshallah. Yeah. Okay. So just 1 more minute, inshallah, and then I'll give some opening remarks, and I will invite some atheists on stage, inshallah.
Perfect.
Guys, feel free to raise your hands, whoever wants to.
Especially atheists, but yeah. Okay. So, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Guys, so we're very honored and lucky to have with us Dr. Al-Massari, who actually, unlike many traditional scholars of our time, he has a background in the secular sciences as well. And he's obviously a scholar in the Islamic sciences. And so he's actually the perfect person, we believe, to have an intellectual discussion on the topic of God and various other questions that arise about the origins of the universe and where we come from and stuff like that, from a scientific, from philosophical, and obviously also from an Islamic perspective. And so we want to we wanted to host this event to give the audience on Discord the opportunity to sort of interact with the very best that the Muslim world has to offer on this topic. And so Dr. Massari, if you have any opening remarks, you're welcome to share those, and then I'll be inviting some.
Everyone is welcome. Also, all questions, even the most embarrassing, are also welcome. So this is the whole business starts with asking a question, with doubting whatever is there, until we come to something which is a core of fundamental epistemological facts which we can start from. Yeah, let's go ahead and start. start with your
Okay.
introduction, and with the you'd like to start with reading because I thought the questions addressed to NASA is quite intriguing and interesting. We start with these,
Sure.
or do you have another idea to start? I thought this is a
I
good
think,
starting point to see, because this is regarded, NASA is regarded like the Catholic Church of science, of scientism, or
Sure.
logical
Maybe we
positive.
can. I was thinking.
So it's like
Yeah, yeah, sure.
addressing to the Vatican of science, in the common perception. I'm just making just hand waving comparisons.
I understand.
Mhm.
Inshallah, I wanted to give you an opportunity to question one of the atheists that we had discussed with before. His name is Dave, but on
Yeah.
Discord he's known as Rational Review.
Okay.
I wanted to invite him up to speak. Dave,
So
if you
start
see
with,
the
yeah, okay.
button.
Maybe if we start with the NASA one, then the discourse after that he can speak in light of that. That maybe a way.
That's Omar, do you want to start reading
Because
the
maybe a starting point is maybe similar, maybe completely different.
Up to you guys. Dave, is that okay, Dave?
Well, it would have been nice to have some advance notice of the topic. I was kind of expecting
Then we can refer
conversation
to it.
related
Yeah.
to
Sure,
the
let's
physics
do that
and
then.
cosmology.
Let's do
So-
that then, if
Yeah.
that's okay with the professor. Is that okay, Doctor?
Yeah,
Dave wants the cosmology. Let's start with that.
that's essentially.
well,
but that's essentially what the NASA question are addressing directly or indirectly. So should we read the NASA piece and see where they're coming from and where are really the problems are in the general common perception?
Okay. Let's do that for a little bit, and
Then
then
we
let
have the
Dave
material
present
to start with,
his-
some material, and then we can build from there dynamically as it develops.
Sure, sounds great. Inshallah. Sorry, Dave. We'll get to you in just a second, but I'll read what the
That's
NASA
cool.
article has to say. So the NASA article basically, I think it hints at the possibility of space coming from nothing. So there's this. Actually, let me paste the article for everyone.
Paste out
See-
here, and just if you read the questions, I think it's an answer to a certain question. Then it goes, because it addresses certain
Sure.
epistemological and
So it's
science.
so I'm going to be posting it in the No Mic channel. Hashtag No Mic, if you guys see. That's where I posted the article. And so the first question that I wanted to ask, I'm going to read it out and give the answer that NASA offers, and maybe we'll take the doctor's opinion on this issue. So the question is, where does space come from? And the answer that NASA gives is that this is a very complicated question to answer, and frankly, we do not yet fully understand how to answer it. According to Einstein's general relativity, which is our premier way of explaining how gravity works, it makes no formal distinction between a description of what a gravitational field is and what space-time is. Essentially, space is what we refer to as three of the four dimensions to a more comprehensive entity known as the space-time continuum. And this continuum is itself just another name for the gravitational field of the universe. If you take away this gravitational field, space-time itself vanishes. Ask where space comes from is the same as asking, according to general relativity, where this gravitational field came from originally, and that gets us to asking where the circumstances that caused the Big Bang, what were the circumstances that caused the Big Bang itself. We don't really know.
Okay.
So Doctor, if you have any comments on this.
The comments on that is that he is let's say with the theory of gravitation, or with the theory of general relativity. Initially, there was theory of special relativity, which studies the relation between moving frames at constant speed, which is again a bit of an issue, because constant speed relative to what. But let us assume we can define that relative to a certain frame, that something moving relative to the Earth's surface, for example, and condensation fixed. Then it turns out that what appears to be moving at a constant speed is actually accelerated, because the Earth is rotating. So we have to look up to a frame which is not rotating, applying Newtonian mechanics, which has been proven by machines and by artillery projectiles and things like that to be a good approximation of the reality. So we have to find a good reference frame, and usually a reference frame, so-called the one in the fixed stars, they take that as a relatively fixed. But it's again, after that fixing, people assume that it's absolute. It's not absolute. Again, relative to what? So that's the first philosophical question, is that to claim that is relative to an inertial reference frame, the notion of an initial reference frame itself is problematic. But let's assume that as a first step to move forward. Then it turned out that there are issues with for material bodies, which we can visualize and simplify by representing them as point particles to ease the calculations and the mechanics. No, in reality, there is no point particle in that sense in the universe, strictly speaking, in the mathematical sense, but as a good approximation. Nuclear mechanics generally work well at normal speeds and normal conditions and so on. But when it was combined with, for example, with electromagnetic theory and electromagnetism, exercise certain forces, like for example, charged particle may accelerate or decelerate in magnetic and electric fields, then some problems arise because of the finite speed of the light. Now, everyone has heard about the Michelson-Morley experiment, which proved that the speed of light is fixed and can be taken as fixed. But this is, again, actually could be a fallacy. It may be fixed because we fix a certain notion of the reference frame. If we change the notion of the reference frame, maybe the speed of light does not become fixed. But what reference frame can we refer to? But leave all these deeper questions, take it at face value. So then the so-called theory of relativity is that the masses and time intervals and so on are depending upon the relative motions of bodies, non-accelerated motion, the simplest type of motions. Assuming the Newton's first law that every body persists in its situation of being non-moving or moving with a constant speed on a straight line until an external force is applied to it. Then Einstein had the ingenious idea to generalize that to accelerated or to accelerated movements. And then he noticed that the famous elevator experiment, that it makes no difference, for example, if you're on a falling elevator, then you will be floating in the air as if there is no gravitation. So it seems to be, at least locally, the gravitation field seems to be very similar to accelerated movements. I'm simplifying things very much, actually, extremely simplification, with the result that he generalized the equations of motions of special relativity into the equations of general relativity and make certain assumption about the gravitation field and about such movements as certain principles. Again, assuming the principle of relativity. But as I said, the principle of relativity is fundamentally also problematic, but relative to what? To that imaginary fixed frame reference in the galaxy or somewhere in the fixed stars, but we know that these are moving relative to other galaxies and maybe something which we may call the center of the universe or the beginning point of the universe. So all of these become problematic. Then these abstractions have developed further into when these equations are quantized, have delivered a very good description of elementary particles and so on, and certain let's go models of thought or models of mental representation have been advanced forward, and resulted in the strange concept, which is usually claimed that obviously matter and energy are equivalent. Nobody denies that. This is not a problem, essentially. But the problem is that there is a notion which widespread, you see it also in the article or the response of NASA, is that that matter or space can come out of nothing. But this is a fallacy. That's the beginning when things become now fallacious. So maybe we should read what they talk about matter or particles coming out of nowhere, out of the vacuum. Yeah? Do you want to read that piece?
Yeah, I can. I'll read that part. It says, how could there not have been something before the Big Bang? And the answer that they give is that nature has over the years presented us with many physical situations where our intuition about how things ought to behave has been shown to be absolutely false. And as you mentioned, you spoke a little bit about the speed of light. Mm-hmm. The speed of light is an absolute speed limit. People age differently if they are moving, or in strong gravitational fields. Space can dilate. Particles have wave-like properties. Objects can in many places be in many places at the same time. Matter can be created out of pure energy. Matter can be created spontaneously out of the vacuum. These are just a small list of
But
things
now you see that there's a confusion between the model description we have in our mind representing, like for example, let's go to the word vacuum. The word vacuum is usually understood that a space where there's no energy, nothing is there. No matter can create it from vacuum. The reason for that is that the ground state of any system, any physical system or the whole universe, is called the vacuum. Just a name, because it initially, before acting on it by any instruments or any observations, there's no particles present, so it appears as if it's vacuum. The main problem there in this description, the state of the vacuum, if represented in terms of quantum mechanics, is an element in Hilbert space, or a very complicated, extremely complicated function, represented as an element in an infinite dimensional space called the Hilbert space. That element is having a length, it exists, it's not the zero element. The zero element is the absolute nothingness. The absolute nothingness, the zero element, you can act on it as much as you can. Do whatever you want, you cannot create anything out of it. The zero element is really the absolute nothingness, the zero of the Hilbert space. While the vacuum, what they call the vacuum, is really an element, an existing state, which is full of fields, energies, and so on. Now, the claim that particle could be created out of vacuum is again also a fallacious representation of the reality. I'm a physicist, by the way, professor of physics. I retired long ago. What happens, the standard example is that you have a high, extremely high frequency, well, that's a very short length light wave, usually in the gamma range, gamma wave, cosmic radiation, gamma wave cosmic radiation. You need sufficient high energy. If this one happens to pass close to a nucleus, and the presence of the nucleus is necessary, so it can participate in carrying energy and balancing angular momentum, etc., but only near to a nucleus, then it appears as if the gamma wave or the photon, if we represent gamma waves as photons, as light particles, disappears, and we have an electron-positron pair emerging, going in the opposite direction with opposite angular momentum, etc., so that the whole situation with energy and momentum or impulse and the angular momentum, angular impulse is well balanced, and the nucleus will participate. There will be usually the nucleus itself will be pushed back or forward in a certain direction. So everything is balanced well. So in reality, we did not create out of nothing. We created these two particles, electron and positron, out of the gamma wave. And it carries their masses and their energies are exactly that what they have taken from the photon, less a small amount which had been taken by the nucleus when it was moved slightly out of the way. So that's the situation. But the space near to the nucleus appears to be empty, and is regarded before we shoot with the photons, high energy photons, appear to be in the ground state of the system, which is called the vacuum. So that's when people hear that, as common man, like most of us, they think the vacuum is nothingness. That's not true. The vacuum is a ground state. It exists. Something is there already. The question will arise: how come that the ground state of the universe as it is now come? Because we know that from all cosmological evidences are now in our hand is that the universe emerged out of the Big Bang, or we may not necessarily assume it is a singularity, but all evidences, all mathematical analysis indicate that the beginning point must be a singularity. And it's actually an essential singularity of logarithmic type, but it must be a singularity. That ground state of the universe, or that the state of the universe from the moment close to zero, or infinity very close to zero, or in the limit we are going to zero, that ground state is something, is not nothing. The question, that's something, where it has come. Does it exist by necessity? That's the question now which arises now. Does it exist by necessity? Is it necessarily existing? Or is it contingent? If it is contingent, then it needs some another necessary existing entity which brings it to existence. Now we come to the philosophical domain where science as being a description of the physical reality, which we can either measure in and observe in controlled observation or repeated experimentation, must fail. We have to go to other concepts which are not based on sensual experience or based on scientific experimentation and observation. That's where the problem happens, and that's the problem which the answer of NASA tries to answer, that we have found in science many things which contradict our intuition, and has proven that our intuition is wrong. Yeah, very fair enough. But the intuition or imagination does not describe the whole reality of beings and existence. That's the problem. The problem with the scientism or logical positivism is assume that anything beyond what can be described by experimentation or directly or indirectly, possibly using logical mathematical steps, anything beyond that is empty of meaning, doesn't make any sense. Question is that statement is not correct. It cannot be correct. So you see that's where the problem comes. The way the scientists of the scientists in NASA are presenting that, maybe quite innocently, there's no deliberate attempt to cheat the public or mislead them, is that they believe really that no truth exists except what can be ascertained ultimately after a long chain of experimentation and mathematical and logical deduction from external sensual experience, measurements, observation, etc. But this is the problem. This statement itself is a metaphysical statement, which claims that anything which comes, any statement which cannot be related back to experimental or observational data is empty of any meaning. But this statement by itself is a metaphysical statement. It cannot be verified by any experiment. So we have now an absolute statement which cannot be verified by any statement. So this theory is self-contradictory. We have to go.
Professor, can you repeat that again?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that last point again?
That last point is that claim is that any statement which does not connect to ultimately to observation, to physical observation of the external universe, ascertained by repeated experiment or by controlled observation like observing the stars, observing the cosmos. Any statement which does not ultimately end there, which we find there, or can be deduced from there, in a chain of deduction, mathematical, logical deduction, is empty of meaning. Does not make any sense. It is no difference between saying, for example, the universe can emerge out of nothing without any agent. The same as we say blah 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 blah. Doesn't make any sense. It's a nonsensical statement. It appears to making sense, but it's nonsensical. But this statement of scientism or logical positivism is self-defeating, because this statement cannot be verified by an experiment. You need an experiment of all experiments. An experiment of all experiments does not exist. It cannot be. Like the collection of all things. So then you will ask the famous question of Cantor: does it contain itself? Then it's not a collection of not of all things. Or it doesn't contain itself? Then it is not a collection of all things either. It's self-contradictory concept.
I think the point of the NASA's response to the question is that
he doesn't go in this philosophical discourse. He says we don't know. We have been surprised in time past that our standard intuition or imagination, which is deduced from the world around us in the macroscopic world, start to fail when we go into the microscopic world or in the huge cosmological level of the world. When you go to these extremes, because all images we have developed in our minds, like a point particle, the image of a wave. Where did we get the image claim that the light is waves? Where did you got that? Do you see any waves? You don't see any waves. Where did we got that? We got it from observing waves in on the water, for example. And from that model, was described by sinus and cosine relations. Then it was detected that waves could be either longitudinal or transversal, and then it was classified. And then the light waves, or the light behaves in certain situation, experimentation, as if it's waves. But in a certain situation, behaves as if it's particles. So this is not very comfortable for our usual imagination, which is deduced from the reality around us. So we get surprised. That's only models of description.
Professor, how about the Schrödinger experiment?
That's concerning the issue of quantum reality and the problem of you mean the cat experiment. Is the cat alive or dead?
Can it be alive and dead at the same time, or you think that's not possible?
No, that's not possible. That's not possible. That shows that the question is not is not directed properly.
I think
It depends upon the interpretation of quantum mechanics. If you apply it to cats, it appears obviously manifestly clear because the cat is a macroscopic object and there's no way it can be alive and dead at the same time. We may not know if it's alive and dead. So it is. So this means the way he looks at quantum mechanics describes our lack of knowledge, not an objective reality.
So it's like options, variables that we just don't know what these variables are.
That's one point of view. One point of view is that the reality is formed by our consciousness. We the moment we do an experiment, we force the reality to emerge in that direction.
And our consciousness is from where?
We'll come to that. That's the question. So you see, that's the point. Now, if we look at, for example, the Schrödinger experiment, is that this is settled the question because another supreme consciousness had decided that already. So the cat exists or doesn't exist, depending or is alive or not alive. Already decided by supreme being who looks at the universe and keep.
But he still didn't decide.
That someone could use that as kind of let's call it the quantum or the observational evidence for the existence of a divine conscious or mindful being. But this is a very an area which is not mature philosophically enough to be presented as an evidence, but it's maybe a hint in that direction. But leave quantum mechanics now. Just stay with the general cosmology and the whole universe first, which is regarded as macroscopic and we can comprehend it some way or another. Then,
Professor, can I?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question. I mean, can we agree, like, at the end of the day, you either have to say that there has to be some type of a brute fact that does not have an explanation, and that either is some type of theory of everything, or you say it's an intelligent creator, right?
What we have to agree about, I think the approach, which was obviously when the time of enlightenment started and doubt started about the church and its doctrines, which was enforced obviously by brutal terror and banning on the stake and so on, a counter reaction came that an attempt to rely on reason. The reliance, because the only thing which we have ultimately is reason. Even experimental sciences have to go back to rational conclusions.
Yes.
Otherwise, we cannot develop science. We must assume certain rational principles and certain logical principles. It developed further until we got to the Descartes statement, cogito ergo sum. Although he formulated as if it is a conclusion, it's not a conclusion. What Descartes really meant that I perceive my own existence by necessity. If I doubt my own existence, then that doubt will inform me that I exist. So the mere doubt, the mere thinking enforces that there is something which we can, obviously, a human being in the cave, in the Paleo age, in the Stone Age, will perceive that without the ability to formulate it so sophisticatedly like Descartes, but he will perceive it somehow subconsciously. So this is obviously essential ingredients of the mind, that the internal perception of the self by cognitive self, by recognizing the I, the German call the the I, this is the fundamental point of start. So this is the fundamental fact which we have to start from. This is zero level. If we start from that and combine that with critical epistemology of Kant, unfortunately Kant regarded that as well established, the issue of the Descartesian aspect, but he was busy refuting the doubts of what's his name, the famous English atheist.
Locke? No, sorry. Who?
Hume.
Okay.
When he read the writing of Hume, as he said, he awakened from his dogmatic slumber. Hume
Okay,
brought many things in doubt. In an issue how to recognize is causality a reality or is just taken from the physical reality, just a conclusion by correlation and deducing from that something, or does it exist in the structure and the fundamental structure of the mind? So he analyzed that. In the analysis from Kant until now, unfortunately, if you are familiar with that or you have the work of ontology which has been done in the antique and then the Middle Ages and resulted in some fundamental important results have been not completely forgotten, but has been relatively ignored. We have to get back to that and import it in the discourse.
Professor, can I ask you, don't you think that the thing, I have a difficult time relating to hard theist or atheist because I kind of, I'm not a physicist, right? I'm a layperson, but I kind of have the same feeling about this question as I think that people like Leonard Susskind have, and that is that the question about whether God exists or God does not exist, atheism or theism, it seems to be so far out of reach for us to, at least in a secular fashion, be able to give a conclusive answer to.
That you are a lay person is for that mean that you are lucky, because if you were a scientist, you will be so diverted by so many achievement and part results of the science that you think it explains everything. Let me just mention some joke or something almost like a joke. When science started becoming successful, and we have considerable good description of nature and its applications in engineering, and that's the beginning of the end of the 18th century and the 19th century, it was clear that science is advancing and producing considerable results. The moon theory, the calculation of the moon phases, the various beginnings of chemistry, etc., and then even Koch and all these issues of immunization and detection of bacteria, all of it gave the people, the humanity, the feeling that we are now on the top of the world, we can understand everything around us. And they thought you can understand everything. The problem was the everything. So in that context, it's like as a small child who got a new toy. He gets so busy with the toy that he forgets everything. And then trust in science increased until the beginning of the 20th century and peaked around the Second World War. Then after that, we have suddenly a distrust of science. Most of it is not for good reasons. Not because people became more critical about science, but unfortunately because science, what do you mean with science for the layman? A layman science is that what the scientists report to him in books, in popular magazines, in the news media. So he started distrusting the scientists actually, how they are reporting. And especially when it comes to application area like medicine, they started now doubt that these guys are not reporting honestly, or they are, for example, the fact that drugs are so expensive that they fail after some time, that certain side effects are detected later. All of that has invited distrust in drug developments and so on, which should not be, because actually the distrust should go to the capitalist system, because the way things are developed and the way things are patented encourages huge corporations who can spend hundreds of millions in these so-called gold standard experimentation, double-blind experiments, etc., because only these big corporations can do it, and they will do it only in areas where there's money to be made. If there's no money to be made, they are not charitable institutions, and the public authorities have abdicated their job. They just became regulator watching all these guys, and these guys prospered under this regulation because it encourages and supports capitalism. With the result that now we have an anti-vaccine movement, which is anti-scientist, really. We have even a flat earth movement, and we have even people denying the landing on the moon and all of these things as an extreme reaction. That's concerning science. Back to the starting point is that we can reach hard fact. We can. One hard fact which they can't reach, that his own existence. Another hard fact which we can philosophically ascertain, that existence or beings are either necessarily existing by their own, by definition, by necessity of reason, or contingent. The question now, can we find out if the universe, we ourselves as persons, we are definitely contingent. We recognize that by necessity. few hundred years ago I did not exist, but some people before me exist, because I see in the reality that people are born from other people. So I can extrapolate that 100 at least years or 1,000 years back, they were human beings. Some of them must have been my grandfather and great-grandfather and great-grandmothers, at least for thousands of years. Maybe if we go much longer, it may be other creatures, according to evolution theory, but at least recently. So definitely I'm contingent. I could have not existed, except with certain lucky conditions coming together. But the whole universe now, if you go exhaust everything and go to the whole universe up to the beginning of the Big Bang, is there a necessity? Is it possible to construct a theory which necessarily produced the universe, and there's no other alternative theory in existence? Two conditions must be fulfilled there. That's the point which cosmological evidences of the existence of God go to, that the universe is definitely in its totality contingent. And this question is relevant. And this question can be answered. It may be difficult to answer a certain stage of time. We don't have the necessary information putting that on the table. We don't have the necessary discourse for that. But it is a valid question. It's not a nonsensical question like the logical positivist claim. It's a metaphysical question which cannot be checked by experimentation. It may be difficult indeed. You are right. It is difficult if we go this discourse. But luckily, in matter of existence of God, meaning a supreme mind, a supreme being which have free will and mind, absolute sovereign free will and mind, that can be having other evidences which we may discuss later. But I started with the scientific part because that's what usually commonly discussed to start with. But there are other evidences we can address.
Okay. Rational Review, do you want to ask a question?
Just a small hint. I was reading in time past, really, because after have been sacked from my professor job in King's Road University because of political activity, and I came to Britain to act politically against the Saudi regime, etc. I got obviously diverted from science per se. But I read some popular science and things like that, and some particular issues. There was a nice writing about quantum gravity from Lee Smolin, and he discussed the so-called quantum gravity. There's an attempt to establish that the whole universe, the whole understanding of the reality, can be linked back to quantum gravity, and there was calculation made and so on. And he summarized at the end, say we are advancing in that direction, but if we cannot construct the whole universe out of quantum gravity or out of first principles this way, then science turn into religion, meaning that we have to assume that the universe have been manufactured by a conscious super mind or something like that. So he recognized this is inevitable. By the way, quantum gravity we can safely assume that quantum gravity has proven to be not the valid theory. Certain observation of quasars and so on put the quantum gravity in some doubt. And some considerable doubt. Doesn't seem to be comprehensively describing all reality yet. It describes a considerable part of reality, but it's not a complete theory. So Smolin has failed in that, but does not mean there's no other theory which may explain.
Hi, Professor. You've kind of talked about so many topics in the last 10, 15 minutes or so. I kind of really can't... I had so many questions at each stage that, I kind of didn't feel like I could interrupt you as you were in a flow.
Yeah.
But you say the singularity, for instance, is a necessary outcome. And we know that, this is just like extrapolating relativity back in time. And we get to the evidences of the CMB, which kind of support the notion of a smaller, hotter universe. And then we have experiments in the Large Hadron Collider, which show like the kind of fundamental particles behave in energy conditions that kind of support that model further back. But then we get to this point at the Planck scale where there's a big question mark and we really don't know what's happening there. And as you say, we haven't got a theory of quantum gravity, and it seems to me it's not in vogue for kind of cosmogony, origin accounts of the universe physicists, for them to basically be offering up singularity models anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I know of a dozen or so different hypotheses that basically offer their accounts for how the universe could have come about. So as far as I'm concerned as an atheist, this is basically an abundance of choices for which I can't. And of course, the God possibility is still on the table there. But given the amount of choices in front of me and not being able to distinguish one from the other, they're all underdetermined. I find myself in that agnostic position where I can't basically say for sure if any of these accounts basically will, they all have explanatory power in what they offer, but nevertheless, there doesn't seem to be any evidence to support any of them.
Absolutely. But now if we leave the scientific discourse and go one step above, then I think we can get to the solution, settlement to the question. All current theories, quantum gravity, supersymmetric quantum gravity, supersymmetric gravitation theory, or string theory, and so on, all of them, there are various theories. I cannot exclude that maybe other theories will come forward, but there seems to be this exhausted all kind of logical discourse, which any subdivision of the reality which we have, on the information we have collected over the last couple of centuries, and the theories which we have developed further up to the Planck scale, as you said. There's a fundamental philosophical problem with all of these, is that.
Well, I would agree that string theory and even some kind of accounts of inflation, basically, the eternal universe inflation kind of models, these basically can offer explanations for any kind of evidences we could bring to the table, wherever we would look at and see the universe. String theory can offer a model that will fit it, and in that sense, these are kind of what I would call unfalsifiable and not, good science.
The problem, if it is unfalsifiable, then it is definitely not science. But the problem is that the problem with all string theory and all current string theories, obviously string theory can live only in either in 11-dimensional space-time or 26, as you may know. And supergravity and gravity, etc., has to have 11-dimensional, and the other dimensions have been compactified away. That's all we can handle and deal mathematically. But the fundamental point which has been overlooked in all of that, there are a certain set of equations or principles which may assume, they are necessary in themselves. Okay. Because what we have to prove is that the universe is necessarily self-contained in itself. That's a fundamental point of ontology and epistemology. As we reached from through the Descartesian approach, that I do exist. My existence is not doubtful. That's the fundamental point. And I
don't understand why you're talking about our particular existence as being any meaningful the universe could exist without us. So
no.
Why
it could exist if it is necessarily existing. If it is
the origin account for the universe.
If it is self-contained with all its all parameters in itself, then it can be it can be necessarily existing. There's no problem. The problem is that all existing theory until now, and all various models, including strings and so on, they have free parameters. This is the fundamental problem which will not be solved there. And that's what Smolin meant to say. Supergravity, in working with supergravity, the work was so that we have to get the gravitational constant out of the equations, out of the theory itself. We cannot put it with our hand in it. It has to be dictated by theory. It has to be a natural dictated by the system itself, like pi. The relation.
Are you aware of Smolin's fecund universe kind of ideas? What's the evolutionary explanation for the universe, where basically he talks about the selection process? There's a selection process taking place on universes in which he sees black holes basically being essentially the origin accounts for further universes, and basically therefore we should expect to find ourselves in a universe that is selecting for black holes.
That's a more intelligent variation of the good multi-universe on an attempt to solve the problem of the freedom or the choosability of the initial parameters, but doesn't solve, because each one of these universes has to be explained. And then explain it by coming from another universe for another universe. This has to end somewhere, or we have infinite regress, and then there's no explanation for anything.
Professor,
But that's not necessarily a problem, though, is it? An infinite regress might very well be the case.
Because infinite regress meaning there's no explanation.
But that if it were the case that it was an infinite regress and there were no explanation, that would just be how it is. That doesn't change the reality of it being an infinite regress and there being no explanation.
But the problem is that this is not a comprehensive universe. Then we cannot. Then how we can explain that we comprehend the current reality? The content is based on the fundamental principles of rationality. That it is what we see and observe is having an explanation.
Well, we currently don't have an explanation for the origin account of the universe, but that still leaves us in this universe with some explanatory power over it. The fact that we don't have an ultimate explanatory power over the universe doesn't change that.
No. That there must be an ultimate explanation. The ultimate explanation that we have to prove the universe to be necessarily existing. That's running away from the problem. You see what I mean? This way, then even the Descartesian point of view has to be doubted.
Well, why would I mean, if it had been otherwise and the universe didn't exist, or an alternative universe existed, I mean, these are all options on the table. That we find ourselves in the universe we find ourselves in. That
has come from. That's why is Smolin going from one universe to another, to a third, to fourth, to explain the existence of this one, and the second one need to an explanation. The third one.
His explanation is mainly related to the anthropic principle, which is basically why we find ourselves in a universe with these kind of characteristics that we see. You know, the constants of nature, things like that. That's what his model is attempting to solve. More.
It doesn't solve. Look at it, because if we assume any theory, we start with any theory. If it has three parameters, the universe could have developed in various directions. We are in a specific one with specific parameters. That choice of the parameter is not necessary. If it is not necessary, then the universe is not necessarily existing.
Yeah, so
but
maybe this is use of language.
There must be something necessarily existing. There must be, whatever it is, the universe or a mind or whatever it is.
Well, okay, so
he's trying to escape
the origin account. So the question mark at the beginning of the universe, basically,
he recognized. I agree with you. He recognized that this universe is not necessarily existing. So he says maybe it have come from black holes from another universe, and the other universe also is not necessarily existing. So it's maybe a black hole from a third universe.
And then, of course, and. Basically, his model could go back in eternally, or not, and then we would have the beginning of the universe problem again if it didn't go back eternally, of course. But there are
we don't have. It has to go to the necessarily existing thing. That's it. The fact that existence or a being is either a contingent or necessary is a fundamental necessity of reason. There's no escape from it. Look at it from this point. This is a yes or no question, a fundamental one. He is trying to escape that by let me visualize it. We both agree that we cannot claim that A creates B and B creates A. It's impossible. One is before the other one.
Richard Gott would disagree with you.
Huh?
Richard Gott is a relativist. He's a kind of notable physicist in relativity, and basically he has the universe creating itself in one of his models, and then we have Roger Penrose, who has an eternal cyclic universe, and there's a few other kind of cyclic universe models, and these are like very notable names, and even Stephen Hawking, who basically had an eternal universe where it was four-dimensional, and then a quantum event tripped the fourth dimension into behaving in a time-like manner, and we get, the law of entropy effectively appearing. These are all notable physicists who have offered
let us just stop at this point, which you say about Hawkins, that a quantum fluctuation. What is a quantum fluctuation?
It would be basically
that's God. It's a fluctuation. It's absolutely free and spontaneous act. That's the meaning of that's the definition of God. absolutely free, spontaneous in activity, not acting by necessity.
Well, no, I wouldn't. I don't think we would call that Allah, would we?
No.
That's and to say the fact that
What do you call it?
If it is
calling it another name, like I agree with you. I see your
label
point.
that explanation with so many other characteristics that you would give to a god, I think is kind of equivocating.
No, but because he said a quantum fluctuation. So quantum fluctuation does pre-exist this change which led to this universe.
If it offered, it would offer the explanatory account for this universe existing or continuing.
Or the one before that, or the one before that, the one before that. You're going to go either to a spontaneous quantum fluctuation, what he called quantum fluctuation, or a primary initial act of God, or you are going to go back to a universe acting by necessity, which obviously the equations do not cover. The equation will not cover that. All equations, all theories will not cover that. They have three parameters. So you have to trip one dimension to make it act like time-like dimension and all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same. That's essentially saying that the initial spontaneous act of God is that what started time.
No, that isn't
sir, but
saying
you are
that.
giving a theological, sir, with all due respect, you are giving a theological definition of God, not a cosmological. The contingency argument is a cosmological argument. Therefore, you are committing the special pleading logical fallacy. Although you investigate nature, quantum mechanics, or a quantum field, or a quantum environment with science, with a cosmological way, when it comes to God, you are just giving your theological definitions. I want to ask you something, sir.
No,
we all agree?
Not a colleague. I'm discussing now God as the one who acting for absolute freedom, who initiate that.
Yes, that's the definition in your theology. That's not a cosmological claim.
Yeah,
so
no, it's not a cosmological. That's the definition. But the starting
sir,
of the. I agree with you. But the question, the problem is that the problem with your fallacy, there's no fallacy. Hawkins called that a quantum fluctuation. What is this quantum fluctuation? It's just a name for something which is not able to specify any further. It's something which acting spontaneously, complete spontaneity.
Yes. Okay. So let's say that
map that to the definition, theological definition of a God as a mind who acts in absolute sovereignty and spontaneously.
No, but it doesn't give you that. Where does mind come into this? You've just described a quantum fluctuation, which we see them in everyday life. Around. We see the effects of them in the world
but
around
that's not
us.
the one who
and
started the
then we're
universe.
not saying that's God. We're saying that's a quantum fluctuation.
Because this is
now, if you want to attribute that event to being caused by God, then there's an argument.
But the one we see in everyday's life, the one in existing universe already. But he talks about some kind of primordial, ancient, necessarily existing quantum fluctuation as the ultimate cause.
No, he describes an eternal spatial realm where there's four dimensions of space, like four space-like dimensions, and the fourth one is tripped into behaving like a time.
Who tripped it? This is using the passive tense does not solve the problem.
Well, no, it's always difficult to talk in the absence of time using temporal language, isn't it? So essentially, this state of four spatial dimensions is eternal to eternal prior to this event occurring. That's Hawking's last model before he died. I mean, the singularity models all came out of favour in the 80s. They became newspaper headlines in the 80s, but basically almost all, like say Penrose, Guth, Vilenkin, Anthony Aguirre. There's so many of them with these models that do not get. They either offer eternal kind of universes, or Richard Gott offers a universe that creates itself using relativity.
Can't be. Nothing can create itself.
Well, you're familiar with the B theory of time. So essentially, you'd have this block of time in which an event in the universe, from our perspective, if you like, a kind of temporal perspective, an event in the universe, goes through a closed time-like curve and becomes the causal
That's a solution mathematical equation. But the problem is that you are describing like an event. What is this event?
Well, yeah, event in our temporal language again. Something that leads to an effect.
What's about the following? I think this is all because in looking at the time, Hawkins, in his brief history of time, goes until the time zero. Let us call it, we cannot reach that because of the singularity, but we reach it asymptotically as a limit.
Zero, that's a very old book, though, isn't it? As I say, Hawkins changed his mind and he abandoned those singularity models.
He has to, because he will get stuck. But with this one, he's got stuck now with this quantum, which stripped one dimension. He assumed that it's got infinite space-time, 4 dimension, whatever number of dimension. I don't bother about the number of dimension. Some of them will maybe compute right away. That's not an issue. Spontaneously, after tripping the time, that's okay, no problem.
But he's basically talking essentially that this universe in one form existed eternally, and it is the only thing that has existed, and its behavior that we experience around us began.
But this is an assumption which needs a proof.
Yeah, these are all hypotheses, as is the notion that God did it is a hypothesis.
No, it's not a hypothesis.
We're establishing which is the actual account that makes most sense, aren't we?
No. This other is not hypothesis. That is forced to, but if we assume that the universe is contingent and started the singularity, then that starting entity, which he calls quantum fluctuation or something like that, escaped to some name which sounds scientifically. It is no more scientifically than saying God.
And without evidence, I wouldn't buy into any of these models. But nevertheless, brighter people than me have put them on the table.
Yeah,
and,
without any doubt, we have to put all models.
As explanations, they offer explanatory power, whereas the God account is simply God did it. I mean, really, how are you going to explain it? Hawkins' model, for instance, gives us familiar terms.
There's a necessarily existing being.
Well, or a necessary universe in Hawkins' case. The universe is in its entirety the necessary thing.
But the problem is that the universe of 4 dimensions, there's nothing a dictated necessity in such a prescription. That's the reason he needed the quantum fluctuation.
However you want to describe it, if it existed eternally and it is all that has ever been, then you call that necessity or contingent, whichever you wish. But essentially, what problem is there with that as a model?
The problem goes, I think that's called the description of space and time. How do we come? Let's go back to the elementary sense perception, how we define space first, for example. Space, usually we sit in a room and they can move right, left, forward, backward, up and down. So we find the 3 dimensions. And then I imagine, and that's well controlled, surrounded by walls, and what's outside I don't know to start with. But then I know from going outside of the room that it is extend there. So I then imagine now it is extending ad infinitum as a flat universe in a pure imaginative construct. That imaginative construct of the infinitely extended space exists only in the imagination. And also, there's a possibility...
Well, how do you know that? All the evidence of the geometry of the universe at the moment, I mean, I only know of some recent evidence which may suggest evidence derived from the cosmic microwave background, that basically the geometry of the universe is flat. So,
it's locally flat, but
it would seem over the observable universe it is flat. Or the curvature is so small we can't see it. And it could be over larger distances that it is curved. But at the moment, the infinity of the universe, its extent being infinite, it is on the table still. There is no solid refutation of that.
Because you are describing to the equation derived from this mental image of an extended in every direction infinitely. The existence at the mathematical model, which is not contradictory, does not mean that the external reality corresponds with that. As a matter of fact, the space in which
I'm not asserting it is. I'm saying that the evidence on the table shows the geometry of the universe is flat, and in that circumstance, that the universe
up to the observation limit
is still possible.
But this is only up to a finite observation limit.
Yeah, so that's why I wouldn't assert
the same
that it is infinite, but I would say that it's a possibility.
The same humanity thought like 3,000 years ago that the Earth is flat, but within the observation limit, and they were right to do that.
Why it can't be. That you have to make the argument why it can't be, and with the evidence on the table,
it can't be. What I'm saying
it doesn't
is that
allow you to do that.
Is the extension which exists in mind and can be mathematically described does not mean that it is necessary outside. It may be, maybe not.
Yeah, and you're saying maybe like I'm saying maybe. Maybe it's infinite, maybe it's not. But at the moment, we can't say.
That space which is infinitely extended everywhere in the mental construction, the R3, the three-dimensional real space, or four-dimensional, whatever we can extend for dimensions, that's an imaginative construct of the mind to start with. And that one is not self-contained. It doesn't contain its own limits. It's only a contingent entity of the mind. It's not even necessary in the mind.
I think, again, this is the evidence available to us that points to basically that the universe can be infinite. And talking about minds and the fact that
I agree with you, but the description, you are confusing the description with external reality. We describe it with this.
No, I'm not making reification here. I'm not saying it is the case. I'm saying given that it is a possibility on the table still, we have to consider that. And as such, if we were to ask the question, is the universe infinite in extent or not, we would have to say we don't know.
Yeah, but the problem is that the R3 or the R4, the four-dimensional space in that flat one would extend it indefinitely, which we can analyze mathematically, creating no contradiction. That's all exists here in the mind. In the reality, it cannot be exist because it's not self-contained. It's not closed, while the sphere is closed.
But the universe
contain all its definition itself. That one have the infinitely far point which has no definition, and it creates problem in the calculation. When the moment you start, for example, calculating scattering of particles in each other, you use the approximation of infinitely extended space, but you try to solve the problems, mathematical problems resulting from that by renormalization and trying to imagine a big box and make the waves vanish at the end of the box, and then subtract infinite background energy and go to the limit. That's what the mathematicians do, what they call renormalization. They have to use this trick, because that one cannot describe an existence.
That could be the case, couldn't it? It could be that locally we have to basically, we have to deal with the local circumstances we find ourselves in. And the normalization and these kinds of things are kind of the mathematical techniques you use to deal with those
to overcome the fact that you started with a construct which cannot be possibly outside the mind. Cannot be the real full description of the reality. Because
is this your rejection of infinity that you? I mean,
essentially,
you seem to insist on the singularity, and the singularity necessitates infinities.
No, the singularity is different. The singularity is a jump from like a quantum jump, a spontaneity. The singularity is the mathematical description of singularity is that multiple variables and multiple options are there in infinite number, initiated by something like a quantum fluctuation or a free action.
Singularity.
Because there's no other way. The universe either coming from a singularity, which is contingent, done by a quantum being or a conscious being, or it is necessarily existing by itself. All theories and attempts to prove that the current universe is the current state of a necessarily existing being in itself have failed. And they lead either to singularity or to escape from a singularity to another universe, another one.
The density in a singularity is defined as infinite.
It doesn't matter.
Well, you seem to have an objection with infinities, and yet you're using singularities as a necessary starting condition of the universe you want to be.
That's only in the limit. That's on the limit, because we have to jump from non-existence to existence going through a singularity. But that singularity is not jumping by itself. There's some kind of quantum fluctuation or an initiating act of a
black
mind.
holes in our universe have singularities in them, and they're defined as having infinite densities. I mean,
but this is all mathematical constructs. The real universe around us.
This is the physics.
Yeah, the real universe around us.
And
we have,
okay, if we're not going to talk about physics,
no,
then
the real universe around us, we know quite well amount of information about the real universe and also development, at least since the decoupling of matter from light and the invention of the emergence of the background radiation. At least to that, we can't go back.
Yeah, about 300k year. I mean, this CMB is basically the evidence we have, basically that we do have that evidence, and then we get to the Large Hadron Collider, which I mentioned earlier, where we have inferences of what was happening before that. Our experiments here, we think we're recreating conditions in the earlier universe. But then we get to this point where there is no evidence.
In the Hadron Collider, we are far away from that. It's definitely we are.
It's 10 to the 10 or something like that. We're doing.
There's no hope
we
to
need
get
to
there,
get to 10 to 32 or something.
Even if we use cosmic radiation accelerated by the galactic fields, we'll not get to these energies. This is the only way you can get there is just observing the background the radiation and its emergence and having some intelligent assumption and calculating back to up to at least to the Planck length.
But then at the Planck length we get lost, don't we? There is no further evidence after a certain point. There's a big question mark there as what that earliest condition was like in physics.
Then someone will come with speculation and say maybe it is emerging from a black hole in another universe. It's just shifting the problem elsewhere. And the other universe, what is it? Is it similar to this or from the same general family? Yes, should be from the same general family, so that we can emerge from it. It cannot be like a supersymmetric universe of 26 dimensions. We have 10 dimensions. It's unlikely that this can emerge from that.
String theory.
I
don't buy in
string theory and things like that. Supersymmetric strings. So it must be from the general family, descending from that one will face the same problem.
Well, that was Smolin's idea. Smolin was basically saying that the offspring of these black holes, the child universes, would basically carry along some variation on the parameters, and those that were favourable to producing more black holes would engender further offspring, and thereby,
I know they're trying
they would be selected. But sorry, that's an aside. Essentially, what I'm trying to get to though is at this first Planck length moment. If from basically extrapolating relativity back to a point in time where we're approaching this infinity of density, our equations, our speculations, are all left open. We haven't got an answer to that.
The best speculation, I would say, is really the speculation of Hawking, when you say a quantum fluctuation. Just giving a secular name to what the people call God.
Loads of these models make use of quantum fluctuations, and in some sense, I find that unsatisfactory. Like you get a lot of usage of quantum tunneling and things like that as well.
What is quantum fluctuation?
Hello?
What is it for a layman?
A fluctuation in the background vacuum. So essentially, you
nothingness.
Get this random occurrence of
fluctuation
energy.
in nothingness. This is intrinsically absurd.
This is the weird thing.
It is a necessary existing fluctuation, which obviously acting in absolute freedom.
You're aware of
Rational. Sorry, one moment. I'm just going to say. I think it's appropriate. I think it will be appropriate if this would carry on for around 10 minutes, then we can have other people who would like to ask.
It's very intriguing. You see, you escape. I mean, these models are trying to resolve the fundamental problem is that the universe is definitely contingent. It's not necessarily existing. It doesn't contain in itself completely all its explanations. Even though
there are lots of people who would probably like to ask you questions as well, Doctor. So, Rational, I think this should go on for around 5 to 10 more minutes
no problem.
extra,
But I think
and then
we
other
should
people
exhaust
have the
this point.
opportunity to ask.
Yeah.
I'm happy to surrender the floor to
No.
people who want to ask
I think
questions.
that point also should also be given. Anyway, so discussion I think have clarified that all these models have recognized either subconsciously or consciously, explicitly, like Smolin, is that the current theory or the certain theory of the current universe. Smolin is talking about, he's the man of quantum gravity, obviously. He's the quantum gravity man par excellence. He recognized that this would not be sufficient to explain the universe. It doesn't bring everything from its inside sufficiently.
Well, Penrose's model does, because that's an eternal model. Hawking's later model does, because that basically is, again, an eternal model.
But it goes to a quantum fluctuation. It's the eternal model.
No, but the conditions in which that fluctuation take place are eternal. So he's talking about the spatial dimensions existing without the time-like quality for some indefinite amount of time, and then this event takes place,
let me throw
changes this behavior.
Fine. I think for the present people it's maybe a little bit tough to start with, but slowly we'll get there. Maybe in another session, not today. We will continue. I think this is a very intriguing dialogue. Let me just throw something interesting for you. Just a reminder of something in the past, that these problems were really bugging the people actually a longer time ago, even before quantum mechanics. You may be aware when Newton established his mechanics and analyzed, and then he needed to deal with space and time, and then he said about absolute space is constant everywhere, etc., etc. Do you know what he defines absolute space to be?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. I know the Newton's models basically eventually
in his philosophical discourse, not in the mechanics. In the mechanics, say the space is absolute, three-dimensional, extended everywhere, and so on, like what we imagine and extended ad infinitum. But in another place, he said the absolute space is God. God is the absolute space.
Yeah, but Newton was a rather crazy Christian. No offense to Christians, but he was a very odd Christian.
He's a unique mind. He has jumps. He's ingenious.
He was a genius, yeah.
That's the nature of genius. A genius sometimes strikes in such a direction, reach such depths, and sometimes commit such trivial errors. But this one is very interesting. It's actually a statement that the absolute space is nothing than God, which have to be interpreted, obviously, in another sense, but and also I give you another interpretation for time. Time is actually God. God is the time. But I will give the interpretation another later from theological aspects. But it has a certain sense. It has a certain sense. So what we call space and time, maybe essentially we are referring to God, but expressed metaphorically in that way, because that's the way our sensual experience of the reality, and then our imagination extended, and then we try to control it by mathematical prescription. And since the mathematics is obviously clear and clean and contradiction free, we think it describes something external. It's not. It doesn't describe something external.
Well, Professor, I've enjoyed our chat. I hope it didn't come across as too, confrontational. There are lots of other people who are desperate to have questions. I hope you don't mind if I step down now and let them. But it's
intriguing that stick to the point of this quantum fluctuation and try to do more research in this direction. I think you will find ultimately it is just an attempt to give a secular name to God.
I would disagree.
Will get there.
But okay.
You'll get it.
Have fun.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Rational Review. Yeah. And it was great listening to your conversation with the professor. And thank you very much for the contribution. True follower of... Sorry, you're going to have to step down. Socrates, please, we're not looking to get into a long-scale type of discussion, but rather a Q&A, so just a question and answer. Yeah. So if you would like to proceed to ask the professor your question, please.
But I would say we are really in an open discussion, which we are brainstorming together. So it's not like someone teaching and someone receiving. We should be teaching and correcting each other and trying to get our own minds.
Whatever makes you comfortable.
So I have no problem
whatever
really that, because especially I hope this is not the last time. We'll have more times than that, and then we can flesh it out. Maybe with this way. That's the way it was done by Socrates and Plato and Aristotle in the academy. Putting a question and discussing it and come tomorrow to it and so on, because this way things become enlightened. Because if we are studying something from your own point of view, someone else come from another side and give a light. For example, this issue of quantum fluctuation, it never came to my mind that ultimately the way it is linked to the various theories to try to explain the universe is essentially, I believe it's essentially just a secular attempt to escape the name God and substitute to the quantum fluctuation. But that's an intriguing point.
We have Professor to discuss this maybe later.
Indeed.
Discussion. We focus on that.
I agree.
Like, I just have a question. You said now that it's enlightenment, that when they do it together and it's like enlightenment. You explain it with enlightenment, but as a medical student, I can explain it simply that your brain is just a bunch of, nerves, and these nerves are like electrical signals, like wires, copper wires. And the more you do the thing, the more you strengthen it, the more you increase the wire, the diameter of the wire.
That's a model, but I would prefer really like it is not a wire, it's more like a network, and the interconnections, the interconnections and the number is so big. The number of brain cells is only in the trillions, 10 to the 10, but the interconnections goes by 10 to the 10 factorial. All kind of permutations and so on. Not all kind, but up to 10 essentially. Every brain cell is connected roughly to 10 in the average to others, which produce about 10 to the 100 connections or interlinks. And this level is needed really to become conscious somehow. It seems to be, for me, just as a casual remark, has nothing to do with atheism, is that when reach that level of interconnectedness, then consciousness emerge.
How? يعني?
We don't know. We don't know yet. We don't know yet. But it seems to be there's a critical threshold where really consciousness and free will can be. Stated differently, this high number of interconnections makes the brain, although it is a macroscopic body, being elevated into a quantum level.
Okay.
It has certain indeterminism.
Compare it to like a brain of a dolphin or a brain of a whale or a brain of a... Okay, it's not as well developed as a human brain, but can't they say they are conscious? Do you think they are conscious? They believe they are conscious?
I don't know. That's a difficult problem. They have certain level of consciousness, but a consciousness in the level which makes us human being, which makes set us apart from the beast, is that we are able to think about ourselves and about the universe. We are able to stand on 2 feet, look in the universe and think about the stars and where they come from. I'm doubtful that animals will have such a way of thinking. I doubt. But they may have certain limited consciousness and limited experiences and so on. But Allah knows best. These things only a divine being can completely comprehend, because he set the whole universe in movement so that this emerges from matter, consciousness emerge. Because someone could argue, not philosophically but more mystically, is that because matter or physical reality emerged from a supreme consciousness or supreme mind. And that supreme mind designed it so that ultimately the development will result into a mind emerging from the extremely complex, and the free will is more complex and more even intriguing than just a consciousness. Is that for that we need some kind that the brain can be in a state of suspense despite of being essentially mechanical, but it's become then quantum mechanical. Quantum mechanical meaning that you have options open, and you have what Hawkins tried to escape to. And that's not a quantum fluctuation, but it's in a quantum state which accept fluctuations and spontaneity. This may be a model guides us that maybe this is a hint for the alternate mind who started the universe. Look, here I give you a model how a finite mind may be constructed from matter, but only because matter has been so tuned and the initial parameters have been so chosen that it emerged this way. If it had been tuned differently, as we know what is called fine-tuning theory, small change in the initial parameters is sufficient to create a universe which is dead, or the universe which collapses too quickly, doesn't have enough time to develop, or is too slow, and nothing can develop, because you need a reasonable level of speed, a reasonable level of...
If there are choices, if you have two different choices, and the chooser, does he have to be conscious? What's the proof that the chooser has to be conscious? Is there a proof that in order to make a choice, you have to be conscious?
If we are talking about the chooser which is necessarily existing, it has to be conscious. But a contingent chooser does not need.
Why should it be necessary? Why should it be conscious?
Because otherwise, how can a choice be made?
Maybe it's just a set of rules that determine this to be like.
Then it is not. Then it is not a choice. You have to prove that a set of rules so dictated that. In the case of contingent being, like a human being in the world, conditions can dictate or can influence you in one direction or another. Your freedom is not absolute. It's a bit limited, but still have freedom of choice.
We are saying
but the concept of choice entails really consciousness and entails knowledge.
What is choice, Professor, to you? What's choice?
Making a decision between A or B. That's choice.
And why can't you be wired to always choose A?
No, I'm not talking about human being. I'm talking about the beginning of the universe. A human being, yeah. That's a possibility. That's a possibility.
In the beginning of the universe. In the beginning of the universe.
The only thing which guarantee for us as human beings that our free choice is genuine is revelation, because revelation addresses us as free agent and we are responsible for our choices. Only that. The divine, the revelation guarantees that. Physics and a self-experience is not enough of a guarantee. It could be a self-illusion.
Professor, it's not circular?
No, it's not circular. It's not circular. Because we have defined absolute freedom of a divine being, an absolute chooser, absolute spontaneity. He himself was not conditioned by anything. That's the reason any attempt to ascribe to God, like in Islamic tradition, the Mu'tazila, Allah is obliged to do salah and al-aslah is nonsensical. It will end him turning him into a mechanism and turning the problem of divine existence again to square zero. His absolute spontaneity, absolute freedom. It can't be otherwise. In the ultimate calculation, he does something for something, but it ends ultimately into absolute freedom, absolute spontaneity.
No.
There's no other way. The other one is a contradiction.
Does that imply that...
or going to an infinite regress, which is, again, will end nowhere.
Professor, again, what's the argument with infinite regress? I don't think a lot of people exactly know what's infinite regress.
Infinite regress essentially starting from that. Let me start with the so-called circular, which everyone recognizes that it's impossible. A creates B, so A has to be before B somehow in the rank of existence, even if we take time out of the equation. Existence of A is a precondition of existence of B. And B is a pre-existing condition for A. So A cannot exist unless B has existed before, and B, etc. Now you add one more, A, B, C. Circular is impossible. A, B, C, D. And you add more and more, and then the human mind, being finite, play a trick on you. You break the circle and extend it to infinity. Play a game with yourself. It's not going to solve the problem. There is no cause. Then the meaning, the current cause now, we said this is A is conditioned by B, B by C, C by D, D by D5, D6, D7, all the way to the limit. If there's no limited ending or limit, it can be infinite many members, but it has to converge to a limit. If it doesn't converge to a limit, then there's no explanation. Then A is hanging in the air. Because A needs B to be explained, and B needs to C to be explained. It must ultimately go to a final explanation, or there's no explanation, and there's no reason. Reason meaning there's explanation. That's the meaning of rationality.
Yeah. steep.
Otherwise, reason doesn't make
do you wanna say
the rationality does not make any sense. Then there's no difference between you and the one in the mental institution. The one in the institution can very well assume that he is Napoleon without any rationale for that. Because certain damage in his brain or whatever damage in his mind structure cause him to lose the principle of rationality. So he is firmly convinced that he is Napoleon without anything indicating that he should be believing that he is Napoleon. But you don't do that because you are rational. I'm not Napoleon because I know I'm not Napoleon. I can look in the mirror and I can see whatever narrated about Napoleon. If I ascertain that he exists as someone called Napoleon by studying history and reach conclusion with certitude that he existed before my time, and there are even picture of him and statues and so on, and then I check myself in the mirror, I'm not him. Because you are rational. You find explanation for something but through something else. If we lose the principle of rationality, then reason expires. Then even the question, does God exist or the universe exist, become irrelevant. Then we are a bunch of mentals. The whole universe is mental. It's okay, fine. That's no problem.
A question. Do you want to ask Hart?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, for your excellent presentation. First of all, about consciousness. Isn't consciousness also contingent, or it applies to infinite regress? Moreover, radical consciousness is insanity. So even consciousness must have some causality, some is casual, isn't that right? I mean, I cannot imagine radical consciousness. Radical consciousness is... What I'm trying to say is that consciousness is also contingent, in my regard.
No, why it is, where does it say it's contingent? What is it? What's it? The concept of conscious make it contingent on the consciousness is a description of a certain not an independent entity, but it could be independent in the case of the divine being. It's a pure consciousness, but I don't see in the concept of consciousness any indication of contingency or necessity.
Okay, that was my secondary question. My first question is that the contingency argument consists of two parts. First is demonstrate the necessity for a necessary being. This is what we were trying to do so long. And then is the second part that says demonstrate that this necessary being is God. So atheists can also accept. I think
there's a problem here. What the question is that by necessity of perception and reason, by our own consciousness about our own being, and then the development, obviously expressing it in such a sophisticated language has come very late in human development. I don't think the caveman could articulate that like that. But let's assume we have developed, and also a child will not be able to articulate, although he perceives it subconsciously. But let us see, we are now articulate, and we know that. With the Descartesian system, we achieve that I exist. I can ascertain this fact, and even doubting it will assert it. So now when we look at existing things, we see that we can divide beings as being either necessarily existing or contingent. There's the impossible existing is just a subdivision, a logical subdivision in the mind, because it doesn't exist. It has no existence. Okay. So that's the division of things. The question is that now, if we come to the conclusion that every being is either necessary or contingent, by necessity of reason, that's pre-scientific. That's like it's not a part of the formal logic. There's more content. It's a statement or it's a concept. If the question is the universe necessarily existing or not?
Exactly. But atheists can also agree that there is a necessary being. But that might not be God. Isn't that right, sir?
No. It may be. Yeah, necessity does not. That will be done if we can develop an ontological proof that a necessarily existing being is by necessarily conscious, or necessarily that what Saint Anselm tried with his proof, which is failed. We know it's a failure. It doesn't work.
Yes. What I'm trying to say is that the word being is confusing. in the contingency argument, it means a necessary existence. So atheists can agree for a necessary existence, and then we need to investigate whether this existence is God.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
That's the second part of the contingency argument.
Yeah.
So my question is that the necessary being could not have been any other way and always existed. Isn't that right, sir?
Absolutely. And there's only one such being.
The definition of the necessary being or necessary existence is that it could have not have been any other way, and it always existed.
Yeah.
Isn't that right? Yes.
Yeah.
So my question
in some sense, we have to clarify what the meaning of time.
Yeah.
Because time is a complex issue by itself. But in some hand waving argument to start with.
That's right, sir. I accept that. So my question is, could Allah have been any other way, given the fact that Allah is conscious? It maybe has body parts or has specific character. What I'm trying to say is that if you don't insert a theological position, how you define Allah in theology, in a cosmological sense, Allah is not probable to always exist inevitably, because he got specific characteristics. For example, he's got a specific character. Maybe he's got body parts. He loves humanity.
No.
So what I'm trying to say is that if we are not to do the special pleading logical fallacy, we need to investigate whether Allah fits to the definition of a necessary being. That is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, but leave the theological one. The first stage is to establish, is the universe existing or created by a being?
I already accepted that.
And that being
I already accepted
only what the attribute of that being must be then that he is capable of creating ex nihilo, that he has absolutely free will, and that by necessity that he has sufficient knowledge to choose a certain universe, etc. Sufficient knowledge has to be clarified. What is knowledge and what is limitation also. That's the beginning. Is that the one of the scripture? That's another question. If the one of the scripture does not fit with that, or in scripture, this which shows clearly that this is not the creator of the universe. It is a fictitious divine being. It has added attributes or thought attributes which are not correct, or have not expressed properly, or some people expressed it metaphorically in the wrong way. So this is a separate issue. But what the scripture, you use the word Allah as you're referring obviously to Islam as being the one who represents as the last revelation.
Meaning God.
Yeah.
Yes, God in general. But what I'm trying to say is that more intuitive to think something simple to always exist, like a quantum environment, than to think that something very complicated with specific qualities, with specific character, always existed inevitably. Inevitability implies something simple. For example,
agree with you. You are using Occam razor, yeah. But that actually the quantum fluctuation is a simple word referring to an extremely complex being or entity. That it appears simple is just maybe a fallacy of the mind. It has all the complexity of being in itself. Deep question of which maybe cannot be insulted in by itself, cannot be scanned down the whole way. Let me give you for example, just a side note. Ibn Hazm says that when say Allah is comprehensive or God is comprehensive in knowledge, say we should not say that he comprehends himself completely, and we should not say that neither nor, because if he comprehends himself completely, meaning he can be controlled and completely comprehended, and this contradict being infinite and divine. And if you see he doesn't, then mean he has lacking of knowledge. So both statements are contradictory. They should not be said. He knows himself, but you cannot say he comprehends himself. He comprehends the universe in knowledge completely, because the universe is limited and contingent. He has complete control and knowledge of the universe, but of himself. I'm just mentioning these. So the same with the quantum fluctuation. It's much complex than you think in itself. It is a word trying to hide an infinite complexity.
Okay, we both agree, sir, that the philosophical nothing never existed.
Yeah.
Do we agree on that? So
Absolutely.
I think that atheists should agree with theists that there was always something.
Absolutely.
There was always something. Because
the question
how we know
what is
that?
this something? That's the only question, actually. This is the fundamental point.
Yes.
That there's that the absolute nothing does not is impossible. It is just a mental what's it called, presetting, which we can express linguistically,
Yeah.
but doesn't. Is it like what they call the mathematician and the programmer call a null pointer? It's a word or expression pointing to nothing.
Yeah, that's true. But I think that if we exclude the philosophical nothing, the next inevitable thing remaining is the simplest fundamental form. In other words, some kind of cosmological nothing, not some very complex intelligent being. What I'm trying to say, why we think that nothing is probable to always exist? Because it's simple.
Yeah.
That's why we think that nothing is a probability.
That I think this is not the correct way. The correct way, because we have, by our consciousness, recognize that we exist, and we recognize our contingency as individual person. But the whole universe may or may be not contingent. But by necessity of reason, there must be a necessarily existing being. Something must have always existed from eternity to eternity.
Exactly.
There's no escape from that. The absolute nothingness is just a setting or a pointer in the mind pointing to something which we analyze but does not exist really. Is a null pointer.
Yeah.
But because we can linguistically express things with the language, which refers to nothing in the external, but linguistically it's a correct statement. Like, for example, I could say this circular square is very beautiful. It's a very nice statement. Nobody objects to it linguistically. It's structured correctly, but it refers to nothing.
Yeah. In contradiction with other atheists, I already accept the necessity for a necessary being. So I accept that something always existed and could not have been any other way.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to... Now we need to investigate what is more probable to fit this description. Some kind of environment, the simplest fundamental form, or an eternally complex being with eternal qualities.
That's
okay. That is my objective. Okay.
I agree with you. This is the Occam razor, and this is the way to reduce metaphysics to the minimum. But let us look to it objectively. What you call the simplest thing, quantum fluctuation, may be the utmost complex thing. It's actually in some versions of quantum gravity or quantum theory going down to the Planck level. If you go lower the quantum level than the universe, which is smaller than the quantum level, and you're supposed to be enter it mentally, turns out when you are inside, it's as big as our universe, and our universe appear to be under the quantum level. So it's like mirror image of each other. So what the quantum level, the small, may turn out to be the big one. And that's what the equation indicate. So the normal human experience and imagination can fool us. So we try to put it in form of mathematical equation. But also the mathematical equation can fool us because they can bring solutions which are manifestly absurd until we give them an interpretation. And we fall in the trap that we think the interpretation represent a real reality outside. It's not. Like, for example, the usual interpretation of antiparticle, that it is that's a hole in the sea which is full with particles or something like that, which is just a model of thinking about it. And based on that, the whole vacuum is actually a sea full of particles, hidden particles. And if you knock one of them out, then particle will emerge, and the hole, the missing place, will appear to us as antiparticle. That is just a pictorial representation. It's a very nice one, and some people believe it has some kind of reality outside. It's not. It's describing something which we cannot visualize otherwise, except using these visual models plus mathematical description. Obviously, we have to control them with mathematical description. Take, for example, when you solve even simple equations, sometimes you get you're solving an equation, for example, of a simple motion like a projectile and so on, and you find like a complex solution. Obviously, the path cannot be complex, cannot be, it's a real path. So, but then you interpret the imaginary path being something else. You give it an interpretation.
Yeah.
So mathematical solution can be wider than the reality so that the other aspects can be interpreted or has to be dumped away. Usually it is interpreted.
I'm not claiming necessarily a quantum field or something like that. Maybe a simple environment that may be evolved to something else. I'm not claiming that is necessarily a quantum field. But what I'm next, how we define probable. Okay, so maybe
I would say it is just a bit matter of naming. With this simple environment must have these fundamental attributes. It has spontaneous fluctuation or spontaneous action, acting absolute spontaneity, which we in human language describe as acting by absolute freedom, which requires from our human concept of consciousness and action requires some kind of knowledge. And this is essentially the core of definition of a divine being, a supernatural being. In contradistinction to a nature which is dead, deaf, blind, and dead, acting by necessity, by internal mechanism, which is evidently does not solve the problem with the universe. And all the other solution our brother a few minutes ago discussed, that the universe may have emerged from another black hole, is just escaping the problem by shifting it back and back and back and
yes,
back.
Exactly.
Which will get nowhere.
Again, the contingent.
Yeah.
That doesn't go around contingency.
Yeah.
That is what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Socrates.
Okay.
But these are very good points, yeah. But it comes ultimately into what can be named. But we will come also, obviously, the issue of divine existence in the sense of theology, of scripture or revelation. We will discuss that has luckily other avenues of description and approach, which may be very interesting. But we get to that, inshallah. But let's go to the...
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
دكتور محمد ناخذ بريك دقيقتين.
على راحتكم. أنا فريش قاعد أشرب قهوة ومستانس. Go ahead. I'm drinking coffee and enjoying myself.
نحن نريدك كذا. الله يعطيك العافية يا رب. Okay, guys. Who? God 420. Do you have any question?
I had a question, but it's not in the exact same line as where you've been talking. That's why I've been waiting. Didn't want to deflect it too much. But my question was...
Is it related?
Yeah, go ahead.
What's your take on the evidential connection between the mind and the brain? That seems like our being is actually the brain itself.
That's again it's one of the like philosophical question. I would say is it is. I gave once a model when we were discussing what is the spirit or what's the soul. I gave a model and how it can survive and how can be resurrected. I gave the model of a computer program. Computer program, obviously this is an extremely complex one, the human one, but let's see. Computer program, that's the program itself plus the data. That program has a certain existence separate than the hardware. It will never act or be effective or appear. I can copy it, for example, on a hard disk, or I copy it on a CD or something like that, and can save it for the longest time I wish, as long as the CD does not rot or disintegrate. But when it is activated, I can take it from one computer to another, and it acts the same way with the same data as if it is the same person. So the question, without the hardware, that program will never work. But the program can be visualized, or at least analytically, mentally, assumed to be a separable entity, although it will never have any activity or meaning without the hardware. So the brain itself, I wouldn't say we are the brain, but the brain being in a quantum state so complex, is the cells themselves are the substrate for this emerging consciousness and the personality, which entails a considerable amount of experiences and information. My personality developed over time by the experiences I gained since childhood and so on. Initially, it was essentially blank, just a basic human personality, but it developed into the unique person who I am. If that copied and instituted in another body, even in another universe, even with more other dimensions, some way or another, as a logical structure, I will be resurrected. I gave this model. So I don't know if that's illuminating enough answer the question. Maybe it doesn't answer the question, but it gives at least a hint that
partially answers my question.
We cannot say it's really we are the brain, but the brain is a necessary part of expressing ourselves. Ourself is that program and the data and the totality taken together, which can be copied according to the theology, the angel of death or whatever, an angel copy that and keep it until the day of judgment and is instituted in another body. Maybe in another universe altogether. And maybe copied now in another universe, waiting for a day of judgment or whatever it is. All these possibilities do exist. But it needs obviously assumption of a divine being who designed the system to be acceptable for this. But it's an interesting question indeed. But I don't think that we are identical with the brain. Something more than the brain.
Yeah, but at the same time, no two brains will ever be alike. So Definitely. You could never say download me onto any kind of media and transfer me to another human.
No.
Because upon installing me into that other human, I will not be me.
You developed a certain...
I'll be an amalgamation of me and the other human.
And this is what the scripture says, that's blowing the spirit. Or what, for example, the Islamic tradition of certain prophetic statements saying that at a certain time, which is usually, if we synchronize all the narratives, because the narratives are a little bit... not narrated clearly, but if you synchronize all of them properly, is actually after 40 to 42 days. The spirit is blown. This is obviously a metaphorical expression. Some people say the spirit is blown is indicated bodily by the starting of the heartbeat. Maybe that's what guided the people in Texas to their current law. Anyway, that then from that moment, you are an entity and person. You are on the record. Before that, you are not in the record. You are just a part of your mom's body, according to Islamic law. So before that, you are part of your mom's body. She can abort you. You are not. You don't exist. You are just. You are like a dimple. you are a parasite. Actually, after that, you are still a parasite, sucking for her blood and so on. But a parasite which has a value. Before that is a valueless parasite. She can't abort it. She doesn't even have to have the permission of the husband because it does not even belong to the husband. His contribution is minimal. Is not worthy of any respect. After that, it will have absolute protection except if the mother's life is in danger. For example, I'm just addressing the legal aspects just secondarily. But this claiming blowing the spirit or initiating someone on record, yes, entering someone on record, make you a unique personality and keep you on record for eternities, open in the future.
May I ask one other little question?
Go ahead, yeah.
If I am allowed?
Yeah, but don't bring such deep and troublesome questions.
It's an odd one. It's if a female spirit ever finds itself in a male body or vice versa, can that happen?
That's I don't there are let us go what the physiology on the biology says. The biology usually a female, the normal, we have odd cases which called what hermaphrodite or that word is very long.
Hermaphrodites, yeah,
hermaphrodites,
they have both. But usually only one is working. They're not both functional.
And the difficult one, the more difficult one, which is, for example, Islamic law in time past has struggled with, I will mention later. But normally you have you have an XY chromosome, so all the makeup is normally tuned harmonically and so on to be a man, or an XX, all the makeup and the hormones except odd singularities. Then we have the odd cases, we have double X and one Y, or 3 X's, etc., or 2 Y's, and so I don't think we have ever 2 Y's. Maybe it happened by some errors in the splitting, in the mitosis.
Marfan syndrome.
From a spiritual point of view, not a biological point of view.
But excluding these cases, I don't think that an XY will have, in some sense or another, spirit of a woman, or it may be. My feeling is that this issue, which has become prevalent nowadays, is that because in the postmodernism and secularism, the issue of freedom and personality has become so amorphous that people somehow came to the conclusion that's a matter of choice, and the people are not willing to accept that there are things in the universe dictated to you and you have no choice about them, and this is perfectly fine. That's how the reality of the universe is, and that's the way we have to accept it. It is destiny, it's qadar, it's not inescapable. And this fact, together with the issues which emerged with the depriving of women over the Middle Ages and before, even in the Islamic society, of their rights, resulted in an extreme movement in the other direction, so-called feminism, and even movement which some masculinism, if we can call it they call it envy of the penis. Sorry for the expression, but so all these complicated things resulted maybe in such social discussion and behavior which make some people who are male feel or prefer to be feeling female, and they think they have a female spirit. I'm doubtful that it's really deep-seated biologically and in the essential situation of the creation. I don't think it is that. I think it is more due to the prevalent philosophy, the behavior in the society, etc.
Related to the topic of God.
But this has to be analyzed by in its own right. I don't think it's just these hand waving responses I just gave are enough. But my feeling is not really. It is coming. That coming is from being unhappy with your own being generally. The postmodern human being is unhappy with his own being. He has an emptiness internally because of secularism, and because of the lack of meaning of life. The lack of recognizing where you fit in the universe, and this all result in self-doubting what you are. Are you female? Are you male? Are you human? Are you an animal? I heard about some guy in America who has tattooed himself to the tune that he looks like a lizard. I don't know how to. I don't want to judge this person, but I have a feeling there must be some sickness there. It can't be normal. Why should I tattoo myself as a lizard? How come that a lizard? I don't think lizard is superior to human being in any respect. But somehow he accepted that he ought to be a lizard for some reason or other. I don't know.
Allah.
I think it's a psychology of the postmodernism where everything has become amorphous. God might exist or exist. The state deserve obedience, no, it deserve demolishing. Parents have an authority they don't have, and all of these things everything has become relatively confused in matter of morals and self-definitions, which goes back, by the way, to issues of excessive trust to science, and then now excessive distrust to science. I think it's a social problem. It's not an issue of really deep spiritual or biological issue. I think it's a social, psychological, and psychological problems resulting from a certain environment that influence in the postmodern society, one which essentially everything goes, except the limit which the states are trying to keep, so that at least some reasonable living together persist. People will not tolerate murder. People will not, and the state will not tolerate you running away from the taxes. Taxes are as certain as death. That's it. Anything else, nobody bothers anymore.
Yeah, no, a lot of interesting topics. Pasha, I wanted to ask you if you'd be okay coming on again, inshallah, sometime to discuss maybe some of these other topics, which are, equally interesting, but maybe not so related to the topic of God.
In a remote way, it is remote because the moment I remember one of our professors in the University of Köln in Germany. He died before I joined the university. I joined in the 60s. I'm old man, by the way. I'm quite old. Most of you are much younger, definitely. And he wrote a book. At that time, what do you say? That's year 100 only God. The century without God. That's 20th century. Because God, on the concept of referring to a supreme being, to morality and so on, has disappeared, which obviously resulted in brutal 2 wars on brutality, which humanity has not seen before on all levels. That all is really interconnected, but in a deeper level. But anyway, directly, maybe we should focus now on the issues of God's existence, revelation, and so on. And then I think these are emerged from the same philosophical background, that there are no truths which can be ascertained. Everything is there's no ultimate truth which you can refer to. That's the fundamental problem.
Professor, we take a question.
Yeah.
Aim, do you wanna start? Aim?
Hi. Yes.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much for the discussion. It has been very enlightening for me. So I have one question, and it goes back to something that was discussed earlier when one of the questioners challenged you with Stephen Hawkins. I wanted to ask you whether there is a distinction. Well, first, what are the definitions of time by Einstein versus Hawkins, and then whether there's an idea that you have about time that maybe outside of both those ideas. And then the second sort of collateral question doesn't go to the issue of time, but it actually goes to something you just mentioned. That's like the lack of God in the 20th century, and whether Western powers are moving increasingly away from rational thought and more towards uncivilization.
Yeah. I didn't study the philosophical differences between Einstein and Hawking, but they seem to be, both of them, for them somehow time is relative, and both of them and depending upon measures and clocks. Definitely the time we perceive and so on is depending upon the psychological feeling of events following each other, and then we measure it with clocks. And that one is, but does not deny that what quantum mechanics needs so-called absolute time, because there are certain things which has to be the better explanation. You know, the issues of quantum mechanics that certain things seems to be depending upon the experiment. They don't exist before the experiment. That's even the extreme point of view. That's one way to express it. And the only way to solve the problem, or there are various ways. One of them is the so-called hidden parameter. The hidden parameter is non-local, meaning it's very well possible that when, for example, let me give an example. When an electron-positron pair are created and they separate in space by a gamma ray, for example, and they are lucky enough not to hit with any atom and so on, go for billions of years, which is possible because the universe is quite thinly populated. There's enough gaps there. Then one theory of quantum mechanics, they have, because of the conservation of angular momentum, they have been rotating in the opposite direction, one up and one down. Let's say one like this, fine. That's according to classical perception of angular momentum, etc. Conservation of angular momentum. Now there are two theories. One is that it is definitely one of them is rotating upward and out, but we don't know which one, and so on. And if we measure, another theory is that actually it is not determined yet. The experiment bring it out. But if the experiment bring the angular momentum of the one, let's say the electron which visits our lab here in the Earth, and it's rotating up, then the other one across the universe must be rotating down, must turn down, because it has no direction yet, according to the other prescription, down. But the communication of such a distance is non-local. Local meaning with the speed of light is non-local. They call, and they try to explain that by something called the hidden parameter. Someone could argue the hidden parameter is actually God's action, God's knowledge. So quantum mechanics seems to be needing time to be separately and essentially different than space, and treated differently, and there may be a necessity for introducing an absolute time, a universal time, a God's time. That also connects in the background with the issue that Stephen Hawking said that originally there's a four-dimensional space and then what he called quantum fluctuation, which is what I discussed with the brother earlier about this quantum fluctuation, maybe another name for God. One of these dimensions turned into time, flipped over and became time. This is all imagination, speculation, no evidence for that. So this is the issue of time. Time is a very difficult. You may, if you have read Kant discussion of time and so on. The best, I think, the solution. And I will give you something from the Revelation, from Scripture, from Islamic Scripture. There's an amazing hadith narrated by the Prophet, which seems to be odd at any instance. It doesn't relate to anything. Which the reason I'm saying it odd because that is not known from the people of the Scripture. So we could not say one of the narrators imported from the Scripture, previous Scriptures, and put it in the mouth of the Prophet. So it seemed to be quite authentic. Chain-wise and the usual analysis is authentic. It's also in one of the books which contain a high percentage of authentic narration, this Bukhari. The hadith is amazing. Let me quote it to you in Arabic first and then translate. Hadith is called Hadith Qudsi. The Prophet narrates that God is saying, Allah says, God is saying, يقول الله يؤذيني ابن آدم يسب الدهر أنا الدهر أقلب الليل والنهار. The hadith seems to be addressing an issue of politeness in talking about God. It says, Allah says, the son of Adam hurts me. He says, what a miserable time. He blames time for his misery. What is a miserable time? And I am the time. I turn day and night. I am the time. And then the explanation, I turn day and night. Meaning the passage of time is nothing than the expression of the divine authority. So according to this, there's an absolute time, and that absolute time started with the first divine activity by the creating of the universe, which is we represent mathematically as a singularity. So that's very intriguing. You don't find anywhere in a philosophical discourse. So time is nothing than an expression of the divine activity. It's nothing separate than the divine activity, and expressed for the human being, for the human perception, as the turning of day and night. Obviously, the events are before day and night. From the beginning of the universe, events are going one after the other. Each one is based on the previous one, etc. I would say also, space may be of this category, although there's no hadith about space, because the people's perception of space is quite different, and nobody blames space for anything. So there was no need for a hadith like that. I would say also, Newton's statement that the absolute space, God is the absolute space, is also a reasonable statement if we interpret it similarly to time. We could say absolute space is God, because space is just contingency, the possibility of moving forward, backward, right, up and down, is dimensions, the degrees of freedom as expressed in mathematics. So God is the absolute space in the meaning that he gives things its the degrees of freedom. How, in which direction, how many degrees of freedom they have. In this universe, he gave 3 degrees of freedom publicly available, and maybe other degrees of freedom compactified into the Planck level, as the theory of some gravitation claim that the universe is having 10-dimensional spaces. But if that's true, that's intriguing. If that's true, then quantum mechanics have to be given preference, and we have to modify gravitation and general relativity to accommodate for the absoluteness of time, and separate them again, but in a way which the achievements of the local relativity is not denied. And this is a challenge. I don't think anyone has started any serious new development theoretically in that direction.
I'm going to ask something. It goes to what you just said. So if one takes a look at, for example, Surah Al-Kahf, not from the idea of like these persons who fell asleep in a cave and then woke up 300 plus 9 years. If one were to take a look at most of the ayats there, they are in many ways unsequential. Like in some instances, Allah says, like, you remember the time when we created man, and then he talks about Adam discussing who was created after spirits, the creation of things that existed before him. So the idea of time, in many ways, it goes away, and it goes away from order and almost to an undefined fourth dimension. I wanted to ask your thoughts on that, and is that reflective of like Allah's definition of time?
Could be. You have to analyze it further. There's so many intriguing things. Suddenly you start a point and then you open another channel. But that hadith of that the son of Adam slanders me or hurts me by saying what a miserable time, because usually say this is really a messy time. Even the Arabs used to say khaybat ad-dar, what a miserable, what a failure of time. It's not a failure of time. The time is just a sequence of events. It's a failure of either you doing or failure of someone else. But the people blame the time. And the Prophet ﷺ, by revelation, we would believe as believer, these words had put in his mouth, because he is way too simple and his background in Mecca is way too low than to come to such a deep philosophical assertion. So that may give a hint, but at the moment, really, we are a junction in the accumulated information in physics, especially in cosmology, and especially quasars and far objects, which are going back to close to the beginning of the universe, indicate strongly that if there's any issues and contradiction or asynchronization between general relativity and quantum physics, then quantum physics win out. And quantum physics seems to be necessitating absolute time and somehow absolute space. But we know from measurements that at least locally we have to observe these relativity compared to the local frames. So a theory which compasses both may be really a considerable step forward, but doesn't seem to be anyone. We don't have a genius who sit and do that, because with that you need something who is so ingenious, almost like mental, to have this jump. Until now, most physicists are not ingenious enough. They are happy with the existing theory and try to fix this with this and this with this, and to find some middle solutions by compromising or by escaping into imaginary solutions. But really a breakthrough to doubt even these theories fundamentally and assert the dominance of quantum mechanics or the validity of a quantum mechanics over relativity. Relativity is valid to a certain extent, definitely, but quantum mechanics is even more valid, and more its fundamental premises must be taken more seriously and as more fundamental. And
that's right, but everything changes over the course of time, especially when new discoveries come about, like the Hubble telescope, for example, challenged the idea that the universe was contracting. The Quran talks about Allah expanding the universe. That was proved by Hubble, but it also challenged things like black hole theories.
Yeah.
Right? So the sciences will eventually help even the idea of God. But right now we're not at that space.
I'm certain about that. And but the allergy of scientists after the struggle and the confrontation of late Middle Ages and the Enlightenment created an unlucky hostility between science and religion, which should not have, but it happened. That's history. Nothing can be done about that. And created a certain phase, and euphoria of over trusting science, which is now going. The pendulum is going now to such an extreme. This is unbelievable. Some people arguing about flat Earth, and other doubting vaccination and things like that. It's just almost unbelievable how the pendulum can swing from the far right to the far left. But it's the nature of pendulum. Hopefully the swinging will ease and we come to a reasonable and well-balanced middle. And our discussion...
I hope so. I like your discussion even about like fundamentals, like there's a fundamental difference between like chromosomes of men, chromosomes of women, but those things have been obfuscated by these crazy ideas.
Yeah.
So we're not at a place now where we're even discussing science. And that was why I was asking the second question about, have we come to a place with Western influences where we are now uncivilized? Like the culture is uncivilized.
Yeah, it will become because it seems to be we are getting in the level of brutalization. It is becoming acceptable to brutalize others. Look at the Second World War, for example. Yeah, I know it is war and people are angry, but that, for example, at least 2.5 million German women are raped, and a good fraction of them have been killed if they resisted. This is a brutalization. Yeah, the Mongols may have done something like that, but the Mongols are nomadic people, vicious and backward in historic sense. But we are dealing with people in the 20th century after such a development of science and technology and knowledge, and a society in which almost illiteracy has been erased and so on. You expect people have advanced a little bit more toward humanity. As a matter of fact, they go back to brutalization and other aspects. And also the amorphous definition of the self. Are you male or female and so on. And also being unhappy with what you are. Although you should be happy what you are and try to improve your existence and advance it in that direction so that you excel in that what you are, is that you're denying what you are and trying to become a lizard, or a woman trying to become a man, or a man trying to become a woman, which does not solve any problem. It's just
the whole idea of brutalization is interesting in that it can be both external and internal.
And bestialization, bestialization. It's becoming more like the beast. Beastly behavior is becoming acceptable as expression of freedom, which should be the opposite. Freedom should be, from the philosophical point of view, like from the Islamic point of view, is that Adam has been endowed with free choice and so on. Obviously, the text does not does say that all these attributes have been given so that he worship God with the correct meaning of worship. Correct meaning of worship is recognize God as the sovereign, meaning recognize the reality that there is an ultimate sovereign, and by recognizing from being just a bubble in the space of time, you are just a bubble. You start and you burst after some time. You become somehow divine. You graduate and come upwards more and more as you recognize that you are related to this divine being and you recognize him. And then there is a relation between him to become a friend, and you approach him more and more and more. That's the purpose of freedom, to make that choice consciously on your own doing. That has become to make a choice to become an animal.
Yes.
It's a catastrophic situation. We have to fix that somehow. But I think the fixing start from the fundamental point is that the current postmodern claim everything goes and there's no truths. Whatever you assume is the truth, your choices are absolute. That's a fundamental death trap. This is exactly what the devil wanted.
What you say is interesting, even if you apply the science. So you take a look at people who take that tact. Oftentimes they end up in therapy, and some even commit suicide. Yeah. And this is something that people do not take into considerations. You say freedom this, freedom that, when it ends up having no good end. Like within Quranic or Islamic traditions, we don't discuss solely freedom in and of itself. There's a counterpart to that, and that's responsibility. Exactly. Both those have to coexist in order for man to go forward.
And that's the reason that the ayahs have come stressing also this point, because stressing the freedom is not an issue. It's easy. That's what the devil did. So I can do whatever I want. But the stressing responsibility, metaphorically expressed, most likely metaphorically. We don't know how things in the universe work in the deeper level. When Allah says, we offered the trust to the mountains, to heavens and earth, and they decided, no, we cannot carry this responsibility. And man accepted it. And most scholars would say the responsibility, meaning what was being offered, is being a conscious being capable of making a choice. And man accepted it. So that's an enormous responsibility, which makes you get you out of the level of the beast, which work by instinct, into a level which is, you cannot be a divine being, evidently. Is impossible, it's rationally, and it's not accessible even to divine power, but you can approach to be more divinely by going up.
That's exactly right.
That's it.
That's exactly right. And it's interesting. So if you take a look at even during the time we talked about earlier, the creation of man, and after the creation of jinn and angels, those latter two objected to the idea of the creation of man. And then Allah says, I know what you know not.
Yeah, exactly.
So in saying that, he's talking about the potentiality of man if he understands his own divineness.
Yeah, absolutely. And although Adam started the failure at the moment, but still his failure was corrected by repentance. But what the devil did is that he doubted Allah's command, because people, some people, with, for example, Al-Qayyim went into a discussion which is really catastrophic and was not good. He was discussing that the devil has no reason not to do prostration or the honor Adam as it has been ordered to, because mud is superior to fire. This is utter nonsense. That's not the issue. The issue is that God's command is superior to anything else, to any other consideration. If Allah gives a command, then the command must be obeyed. That's the meaning of recognizing him as the ultimate and the reference and sovereign. The devil doubted that. He thought he can analyze based on that the divine command must be justified by why should I honor Adam and I am more honorable than him. That's not relevant. You may be more honorable than him, but God can give you a command to honor him still. Why he shouldn't be?
Yeah. I find it fascinating that the Satan, after it was Adam who told him of his own existence, Satan then said, well, I'm superior to you because of my existence succeeds yours.
Yeah.
That's the height of like both ignorance and arrogance. It's like,
exactly.
That's amazing to me.
Exactly. And also in another place he says, here in the heavens, in the supreme audience, you cannot be arrogant, because everything there must be humble to the ultimate being. It's very intriguing. And that's it. The non-humility, the arrogance and that's the worst what kind of human being infested be, to be arrogant and think that he is supreme being, why he is not. If he is the supreme being, that's fine. Then you are right to be exalted about yourself. But even there's a very intriguing, I mentioned just casually, hadith. I did not verify its validity and so on, but it's very intriguing if it is valid. It says in the time of ascension to heaven, where Salat was enacted. That's obviously all Mosaic visions and so on. But we're not going to go into these fine points which have not great relevance. Gabriel stopped and told the Prophet, wait here a moment. Allah is performing prayers. Say, does our Lord pray? Say, yes. What is his prayer say? He says, I am exalted, I am majestic. That's his prayer. He praises himself. He asserts the reality that he's the supreme one. So this hadith looks from the meaning very authentic. So he also indulged in prayer in the sense that he is praising himself, because that's what it should be. This is the most amazing thing that he exists, and that there is something which is nothing, like what the brother Elia said, that nothingness is just a fiction of the mind, doesn't exist. Existence is fundamental, and he's the necessarily existing one, and this should be acknowledged. And when he says Subhanallah, it's meaning praise to him, exalted is him, amazing is him. That's it. So, but this is all more in the spiritual side, but it has a very important rational philosophical aspect. So when human being recognizes that, he starts really elevating himself out of the beastie level into the divine realm, and ascends up and up more and more. But
that's exactly right. If people only knew, if they only knew of their own divineness, I think they would run towards it.
That's the divine part of you. That's the meaning of divinity in you.
Yes. Jazakallah khair. I greatly appreciate you.
But that point you hint earlier, you should maybe scan the Quran and see. Maybe you will come to an intriguing, more like, it looks more. It is actually philosophical, but it's more from the ascetic side, from the spiritual side, which is of utmost importance. Should not be neglected. I am unfortunately very deficient and weak in this. I just give a joke. One time my sister saw a vision, a dream, and there was a friend, he died unfortunately on a rare disease of the muscles and so on. I don't know what's it. Anyway, he passed away about 10 years ago, and he was very skilled in dream interpretation, and said the dream she had, or this vision, is not for her, it's for you. But because you cannot receive dreams, say, why cannot receive I know that I have barely any dreams. It's if 10 years goes, I don't have any dream which I can report as a vision. Maybe I have these subconscious dreams and so on, which is the mind sorted its daily problems and so on. You say, how greedy can you be? You have a big computer, you have very big mental capability. You want also to have a reception dish? Be happy that you have the computer. Leave the dish for someone else. So I don't have a dish, and you need the dish for this spirituality and this incitement and this enlightenment which comes from outside. I don't have. So you ought to do that.
I think you have both. Alhamdulillah, you have both.
Professor, if you want to have dreams, I can suggest you an app. It's called lucid dreaming. It gives a ringtone at a certain period time, like of the sleeping cycle during the rapid eye movement, and it wakes you up and then you sleep. It's like, for example, if you're waking up for Salat al-Fajr, but then you sleep, you don't do the Salah, the shaitan makes you sleep. So that time you can have a dream.
No. Leave the app for those who love dreams. I'm happy with that.
It's actually tiring. Yeah, if you remember your dreams, it's tiring. It's a blessing that you don't remember them.
Alhamdulillah, just once in 10 years, 50 years, something of significance. Otherwise, not. So I'm happy that maybe the computer is big enough substituting for the dish. Leave the dish for others. Don't be greedy. Like I called my friend Ja'far. He said, how greedy can you become? You want everything? Doesn't work this way. Be happy that you have a good portion of these capabilities of the mind and of the soul. And be happy with that. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Strong.
I think if we have any other, let me just before, I think, did we have, I think we give ourselves maybe 30 minutes, so we have 2.5 hours, or do you plan for more? If the audience is not already I think 13 minutes, so we have 2.5 hours is maybe more than sufficient for most.
Maybe if people want to raise their hand, if anyone wants to say something, so we check if they are...
I just wanted to make a footnote to the issue of proving existence. So all these approaches through science and cosmological evidences and so on are quite difficult, because they will get you to the border of definition of space, time, existence, and things like that, and they are very deep. Luckily, we have, by divine grace, obviously, we have also the means of revelation. What do I mean with that? I mean that we can prove with means which are accessible almost for everyone that there have been valid prophecies which fulfills the condition which must force the one who sees them and comes to know about them and verify them, that they must be coming from a supernatural source. This way we circumvent the issues of the complexity of the singularity at the beginning of time. And these conditions, interestingly, I read usually from some Christian literature in the recent decades, when I came to England for the first time. Before that, I never have come to interaction with these. They call it Einstein condition. I didn't find anywhere in a literature that expressed by Einstein, but it may have been expressed maybe in an interview or in a discussion which has been broadcast by radio, because at the time television was not available when he was alive, maybe, or a casual conference or something like that. The Einstein condition are the following. The prophecy must be structured. It should not be like what the usual soothsayer. It should not be like, for example, the palm reader. You will meet a beautiful girl and have 5 nice boys or savage girls. That happens to such a big number of people. But a prophecy like, for example, the one in Daniel, like so many months and years after the decree to rebuild the temple, the Messiah will come and he will be cut off from people. That's very detailed, and cannot be possibly fit except to one or nobody ever. That's number one. Secondly, the prophecy must be well established, and the best way to establish that is narrated properly is to be written in a book, and the existence of the writing before the prophecy have fulfilled. And the third Einstein condition is that the fulfillment of the prophecy is not depending upon the action of the prophet or his followers, because otherwise they may try to fulfill and enact things so that the prophecy of their prophet is being verified as being true. like for example, prophesying from Daniel, prophesying the coming of the Messiah and certain events related to the Messiah. This prophecy is well established. It's in the book of Daniel. Even if we attack the book of Daniel, we have copies of the book of Daniel and parts of the book of Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which has been proven to be at least 150 years before Christ by polygraphy, the art of writing, and also by carbon dating, and which shows that the book is well established as a book. But we have also this so-called Septuagint translation of the Old Testament, in which the book of Daniel is included, and we know that the translation is ancient, 150, 170, maybe 200. Some people claim 300 years before Christ. So it exists, and obviously the fulfillment of that's impossible, neither for Daniel nor anybody else, to make sure that a man comes with these features, these characteristics at a certain time to that exact timing. And that one can be verified. For example, I mentioned that's one in the Old Testament because I think in the audience, most of the people in the audience are from Judeo-Christian background, but some from Islamic background. We have similar ones for the Prophet Muhammad. I will mention them in due course, inshallah, in details. These, according to Einstein, if that happens, if you find something like that, he did not mention anyone because maybe he did not have enough information, or maybe these information needed to verify the Daniel prophecy were not available yet at his time, because it needs a very difficult job of synchronizing data and finding times in exact up to the day. But if that's verified, then Einstein concluded it is impossible within the universe as it's known, and human being as the limitation of their knowledge, to prophesize and get this information. It must be from a supernatural being who controls or knows about the universe from outside. It must be from outside. This would be
This is fascinating for a lot of reasons. So just to highlight something you said earlier. So I've read the book of Daniel, and it's one of the two scriptures, one of the three books that I find fascinating. The first one is Genesis and the discussion of light, Daniel being the second, and the third is the book of Revelation, which borrows heavily from Daniel.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to look at Revelations in and of itself. It really is a book of Daniel. But this raises an interesting question. So in many ways, I was having a conversation with someone offline about this. As much as we esteem European thought and history, and we can take looks at the manner in which the science, the rational, would trump the religion. In many ways, I think it was right for it to do that because of certain things. And one of those things is just what you talked about, Einstein's theories about whether these things can be valid. In so many ways, the church had evolved in a way that was anti-science, and something had to come along which would bring it to some kind of rationality that went beyond superstitions. Mm-hmm. That is quite different, though, than what happened in the Islamic traditions. They had a marriage almost between the science and the philosophy and the religion, and I wonder to what extent that idea had been lost by colonization and the power of the West, and whether it can be revitalized. The work that you're doing, of course, does that. But generally speaking, do you think there's a possibility of that happening in order to really bring this humanity back to a place of balance?
Absolutely. I think it's ongoing. I myself regard myself as a small contributor in that area recently, but since let us say the recent maybe 50 years, let's say, there are critical current in the Islamic world after the shock of facing Europe, like for example the Young Turks and so on. When they face Europe and the advancement of Europe, which is essentially advancement besides science, obviously, which is clear advancement, but also the military capability, the industrial capability, which is, as Hunting say, made the West dominate the world because it has the longer guns, not the highest morality. But anyway,
Yes.
the shock was so that they imported from the West the worst what they have, fascism and nationalism and so on, and worked which resulted in demolishing al-Khilafah. Anyway, maybe it's a mercy in disguise, because the Khilafah was rotten and has declined, and the clergy, which was were in control, has separated really from any dynamic, forward-looking thought, which shows clearly in the prohibition of the printing press for 300 years, which is a historic catastrophe of historic proportion. All of that, maybe that cleaned the slate, and then we can start a clean. But I feel after that shock now, there is a reversal to go back. Now, the going back, obviously, like any going back or revival, will have singular and nasty phenomena like Wahhabism, Daesh, etc. These are negative and sick phenomena, but it's natural. You don't have such a shock, historic shock, without have odd phenomena on the fringe. But I think the mainstream is becoming more rational, more critical, and this is being now revived. Although the old guard is trying to, especially the old clergy and so on, are trying to establish its power and control over the people. But I think the day is gone. The day is gone, and the people and the new thinker and so on, and by a new reading of the Quran and the Sunnah, will advance in the direction you are wishing for, inshallah. Hopefully will contribute, and such discussion also contribute a small bit. It's like drops, but when the drops come frequent and numerous in number, it will turn into a flood, Allah willing. So we may discuss concerning to the issues of establishing. The amazing with these prophecies is that it establishes everything in one go. It establishes the prophethood of that prophet. And amazing, if you have read the Old Testament through it, I read it, but I was struggling because half of it is genealogies and so on, which is, oh my goodness. But anyway,
yeah, exactly.
I survived it. But it's interesting that some time ago, so most of it is forgotten. But interesting is that the characteristic of the difference between true prophets and false prophets is always about prophecies. When a prophet prophesies something wrong, don't be concerned about him. He is a liar. Don't bother about him. Only the one who tells the truth about the future. So this is the main things which is stressed in the Old Testament clearly, and has been somehow ignored. But that, yes, I think that should be revived now. And they said the one of Daniel, especially the coming of the Messiah, because it has been prophesied and has come and has been fulfilled almost to the dot. But it needed a considerable, enormous amount of data, the historical synchronization, clearing historic misconception, finding dates exactness, synchronizing it with lunar and solar eclipses, etc., etc. I did some good work in that. I am working on it since like maybe 8 or 9 years. I think it's matures now, ready to go out, inshallah, soon. That will be a stunning one. And I will give it a sub, like I will say, the prophecy of Daniel, or the coming of the Messiah, and in parallel says a cure for atheism, because I think these are relating to physical and historic reality, to things which doesn't go in the depth of problems of quantum fluctuation and the beginning of time, rather in things which are even any one of us, the simplest man and the most complex philosopher, will be able to appreciate, and it fulfills the Einstein conditions. And it also throws a light over the Messiah and his life also, Isa, the son of Maryam, and other things also. So that, and then there is prophecy for the Prophet Muhammad, quite a number of them. I will describe them and bring all the evidences of their fulfillment, etc., etc., inshallah. I think this will, actually, according to the Old Testament, this is the way to go, because the other way is so complex and so deep, and you cannot demand from the common people who are waking in the morning, going in the fields, working to bring livelihood for our children, to get involved in Stephen Hawkins' quantum fluctuation. That's not a practical way. That's an impossible way. Only a small minority of philosophers will do that, and they should do it. No problem with that. But for the common man, that one should be on the table. And this will give his life a direction and an orientation. But it should be presented as solid and as clean as possible. By the way, also Newton...
I look forward to reading it. Really look forward to reading it.
Yeah, the genius Newton tried also that with the coming of the Messiah, and also Darius the Mede and all these things. And he has some good achievement there. concerning the knowing that at his time not enough information were available, he did go do steps. The man is really a good genius. No doubt about that. Without any doubt of that. Okay. I suggest maybe 2.5 hours is enough. I think you have enough headache now for the rest of the week.
We love it so much. Thank you so much.
We're so honored and we feel so grateful to you.
I am the honored one, actually. I am the honored one that I invited by such.
Question from the audience, really, it's very urgent from the audience. They're asking, what's your opinion on Yawm al-Qiyamah? Like, it's going to be a local or a universal thing?
We'll come next week then for that, inshallah.
Okay.
Inshallah.
But just a quick answer. This is, for us in the earth, is not relevant. Is it universal? The whole universe will be changed, or it is local? It is for the addressed human beings on earth, is definitely relevant. That's all comprehensive for the earth inhabitants. Is it for the whole universe? Is it only Qiyamah for the earth, and the resurrection will be maybe will be going from galaxy to galaxy, like in the Star Wars episode? I would envision an akhirah like that would be very lovely. I wouldn't mind to have like that. Or a completely new fashioned universe with other dimensions is also a possibility.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Professor, I wanted to ask, before you leave, if you had any plans for coming back, maybe we could make this, if your schedule allows, obviously, we'd be honored to have you.
What's about next Saturday?
Again.
Should we fix it for every Saturday?
Yeah, I would love that.
I would love that too, because we have still the various prophecies, various things. I think we have considerable, and also I expect if anyone finds something interesting or intriguing here and there, prepare and give us maybe like a presentation, and then we discuss. We should not turn into a class in which Al-Massari is the one who blubbering. We need others to educate Al-Massari and others also. We need. Because
actually, I have a me personally, I don't know about the others, but I have a kind of an idea reconciling Laplace's demon and the second law of thermodynamics.
Excellent. But don't go deep in physics and so on, because I think that half of the present, they don't have enough physics background and such.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, inshallah. I'd love to talk about next. Inshallah, next Saturday, same time. Does that work?
Same time will be perfect. Next Saturday, we don't have the time shift yet. I think what is the time? 16 plus the 23. It may be, no, it's not the last Sunday yet. Yeah. So next Saturday still the same time. After that, we may adjust it according to the winter time. Maybe we'll make it then like 7 London time, which is universal time, or somewhat later. Anyway, I think the majority, for the majority, even in the east coast of America, it is 3 o'clock, so the people must have done their shoppings. They did attend to their family thing, because Saturday is the day for the family to shop and so on. So we may, if for them need to shift a little bit later, so they have more time, then it's good. Obviously, most people will miss their football and so on, but they can record it and see it later.
Yeah, absolutely. No, just wanted to conclude by,
considerable part of football will be on Friday and Sunday anyway. So Saturday, Anyway, the people of London will be happy, because most football will be done before the English one, and the European will have all football gone before that.
No, inshallah, I think the time is convenient. Just wanted to conclude by, giving many thanks.
So let us fix next week, 8 o'clock, like today, the same time, 8 London time, which will be, I think, 9 universal time or something like that. And then I will check, maybe Abdullah will check for the week after it will time shift, or when the time shift, what will be the most convenient time. We try to keep it in that range. So all European, all East Coast, even up to the Pacific, although they will miss, obviously, there will be a noon time for them, but they would have to do their shopping and whatever family attendance a little bit earlier. But that's the best what we can do, because I
think the time is convenient enough that even plus or minus 1 hour, it shouldn't be the end of the world.
Perfect. But next week it's 8 London time, whatever it is, and then we go from there.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Many thanks to you.
It's a great pleasure.
And to the audience for attending.
And listening, and hopefully benefiting, and hopefully also coming with counter arguments and questions and so on, because these things need to be really like polished and ground again and again and again, because dust can easily settle on them. It need to be revived.
Absolutely.
And kept actual always, because I think it's of fundamental importance. It's not a trivial issue. It's one of the most fundamental issues of human existence. So we can get some orientation and some direction. Okay. We leave you in Allah's protection until next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
لا تنسى الإعجاب والاشتراك في القناة.